Chapter 44. Brando glanced at the steep cliffs in the distance and turned back to let Roman put on the ring of cobwebs. He found that the merchant girl's senses were surprisingly sensitive, and this ring could further strengthen her ability. Roman had been coveting this beautiful black and white patterned ring for a long time and was naturally very happy, but he still asked curiously, "Is this also a magic ring, Brando?" "Yes, it can let you hear better. Keep an eye on the ground and alert Freya if there's any movement. I'll be back soon." Brando knew that other than the golden demonic tree, there was also a stone worm in this valley. That thing also came from the elemental plane and was a rare elite in the game. There was once when it suddenly appeared and almost made him panic. "Are there other enemies?" the two girls asked together. "Maybe. It's better to be prepared, right?" Brando did not want to pretend to be a prophet, and the key was that it would be difficult to explain in the future, so he could only give a vague answer. Freya nodded understandingly and held the sheathed long sword in front of Roman and said, "I'll protect Roman well, please be sure to go and come back quickly." "Huh?" Brando looked at her in surprise. Since when did this girl become so cooperative? She actually made him feel a little overwhelmed. However, it didn't seem like there was any conspiracy. He hesitated for a moment, put down his backpack, and took out a coil of rope and a hook. He glanced at the two girls again, and then carefully climbed out. "Freya, is it okay for Brando to go out alone?" Roman asked softly. "Brando has his own plans, and we can't help much. We can only make sure he doesn't have to worry about this side." "Freya." Freya swung her long ponytail, a serious look in her bright eyes. She was not admitting defeat, but she could only do so much with her strength. The future goddess of war seriously considered that her strength might not be enough. To become the leader, she must be stricter with herself. She sighed and held her sword close to her chest, making up her mind. On the other side, Brando carried the rope and walked along the steep mountain wall. He was still a few dozen meters away from the crack in the wall. He could not help but take a deep breath and look behind him. Fortunately, the golden demonic tree and its servants and children relied on sound and magic waves instead of sight to find their target, or else his position would be very conspicuous. He grabbed a protruding rock, and the gravel rustled in between the rocks, but the noise was nothing. He was worried that he would make a big noise, so he tried his best to be as light as possible. There were less than 30 meters left. Soon. There were no more soul crystals along the way, but Brendel knew that he still had one last chance. There was a treasure in the crack in front of them. No, it wasn't quite right to call it a treasure. Although the players called all the hidden places that provided items and resources as rewards treasures, he knew that the treasures there were actually some relics. According to the game's plot, about 10 years ago, a young noble called Borg Nessun, who loved adventure, came to this canyon. He and his companions were separated from each other during the attack of the demonic tree. He was lucky enough to escape and hide here, but in the end, he could not escape from his injuries and died. He left behind his belongings and keepsakes. With the keepsakes, he could complete a mission in Bragg's. Although the reward was meager, it was better than nothing for Brando at that time. However, the belongings that the noble left behind were very interesting. Because it was random, anything could be opened if one was lucky. Brando's best luck was opening an amber Oregon. Of course, he did not count on it this time. As long as he could get a soul crystal, it would be good enough. In his memory, the chances of a soul crystal dropping here were quite high. He quickly climbed into the crack. The rock crack was actually very shallow, but it was difficult to see from the outside. As soon as he got in, he saw the skeleton of the unlucky noble lying on the side. Surprisingly, every detail was the same as in the game. For a moment, he almost had the illusion that he was still in the past world. However, Brando quickly calmed down. He carefully went around the skeleton, and his eyes fell on a small bag. He was slightly stunned because he saw a piece of parchment covered in dust. It was dry and brittle. There was no such thing in the game. He gently picked up the parchment and found that it was a suicide note. There were only a few short sentences written on it. Martha above, I may not be alive for long. If someone is lucky enough to see this suicide note after my death, I am willing to legally transfer all my belongings to this person. In addition, I have a secret ancestral property. I am willing to divide this wealth into 3 parts. 1 part will be given to this person, 1 part will be given to my wife, Sadie, and 1 part will be left to my daughter. The rest of the sentence was vague. If anyone who sees this suicide note is interested in this wealth, please pass this suicide note and my keepsake to my wife. Also, tell her about the date at the Baden Ball. She will understand what I mean. Finally, I am sorry to Sadie. May Lady Martha punish me. Brando finished reading and could not help but be stunned. He was more and more certain that he had never seen this thing before. The previous mission line was to remove the seal ring from the noble's finger bone and hand it to Braggs's citizen registration office for a reward. The mission line ended there, and there was no follow-up. But what was the reason for this? Was it because this place was different from the game? Brando shook his head. He instinctively did not want to believe this judgment. At least everything he had discovered before was completely consistent. There was no reason for there to be an exception here. So what was the reason? He thought for a moment and suddenly thought of something. Could it be that only the first person who discovered this would receive such a mission? There were many unique missions and first missions in Amber, but there was also such a situation in the Instance dungeon. No one had ever mentioned this before. He hesitated for a long time. He could only carefully fold the suicide note and the seal ring together, and then put them close to his body. He felt that this mission seemed a little familiar. Perhaps someone had completed it in the past. Unfortunately, the part about the noble's daughter's name and home address in the suicide note had become vague. Otherwise, this mission would be simple and clear. However, Brando did not care about this. The more troublesome the mission, the better the reward. At worst, he could start with Braggs's citizen registration office. At least he knew 2 clues, the noble's name and his wife's name. And that was a matter for the future. Now he had to face his own problems. After putting away the suicide note, he began to examine his spoils of war. There were 2 rubies in the cloth bag and some coins worth about 30 silver coins. This was a large sum of money. In addition, there was a pipe, a dark gray stone, and a glass bead. Brando poured out these things and carefully looked through them. He was disappointed to find that there was no soul crystal. He could not help but sigh. If it was in the game, these rewards would be quite good. However, what he needed now was not materials or money, but items that could immediately increase his strength. But despite his disappointment, Brando still swept all these things into his waste bag. He did not have time to check if they were useful. Those were just decorations and miscellaneous items. In short, he had to be safe first. After cleaning up the loot, he glanced at the skeleton once more before returning to where he came from. Everything went smoothly, and when he returned to the crevice where Romaine and Freya were, he saw the 2 girls heave a sigh of relief. Brando, you're finally back. Without you, Freya and I were so nervous. There was no sound around, so it was very quiet. Roman patted her small chest and sighed. Don't drag me into this. Freya's face turned red. I just went to check the surroundings. There's only a patrol team outside, we have to kill them as soon as possible. Are we going out? We don't have to go out. We can wait until later and leave from the other side of the mountain path. That way, we can avoid fighting, but we don't have much time. Brando replied. How much time? Freya asked. About 2 hours later. The girl was stunned. how far is Fortress Reden from here? Ever since she was young, the furthest she had been from home was Verbin. Although Fortress Reden was often mentioned by the adults, it was only an impression. Let's put it this way. If we were 2 hours later, we would have to race against Madara's undead army. Brando looked at Roman. We might reach Fortress Reden first, but we don't have much time left. Then will it be faster if we go out and kill that tree? She asked. There's a secret passage behind that tree. It was dug by merchants to avoid the checkpoints. I've seen it in the documents of Braggs when I was still in the Braggs militia. Our protagonist lied without batting an eyelid. But he didn't lie to Freya about the secret passage. He only knew about it in the game. Freya looked at him suspiciously. Is that tree dangerous? She pointed outside. It's very dangerous. We have a 50% chance of failing. Brando answered seriously. Although he really wanted to take a gamble and kill the golden demonic tree, he told himself that he had to tell Freya the truth about the risk because he had to be responsible for their lives. In a team, everyone had the right to choose for their own lives. This was the basic rule of the Amber Sword. No one could force anyone else. Freya was silent. What about you, Roman? She asked. Roman shook his head. I like to take risks. My life should be used for something meaningful. Freya looked away and nodded. I understand. Brando, please lead us to defeat it. If we fail, I won't regret it. Brando smiled. He didn't expect Freya to have such a big reaction. It's not that serious. I'll tell you how to deal with it. But first, we have to take care of the patrol team. 6 demonic trees. You're already very familiar with them, but this time we have to end the battle in an instant. Then he brought the two to the edge of the crack and looked out. They could clearly see the golden demonic tree's descendants. Brando gestured to the area. We'll sneak in from here. Wait for my signal and attack. Before the battle starts, we have to be as slow as possible. We can't let them hear us. We have at least half an hour, so there's no need to rush. Freya. Yes. Roman and I will attack from the right. You hide under the rock on the left. When we attack, you attack the two at the back. Do you remember their weakness? Brando had Roman on his side to protect her and also to reduce the pressure on Freya. After all, the merchant girl didn't have much fighting strength. Freya nodded. The demonic tree's weakness was their 4 limbs. Because their sensory organs were all in their 4 limbs, they were no longer a threat if they lost their 4 limbs. But she was a little nervous. Before, they had used some unexpected tactics to deal with the demonic trees, such as falling rocks. This time, they had to face them head-on and end the battle in an instant. She wasn't worried that Brando wouldn't be able to do it. But could she do it? Freya wasn't sure. Brando looked at her and understood what she was thinking. Every newbie had some kind of problem. Although Freya could be considered an NPC, she shouldn't be an exception. He thought for a moment and encouraged her, don't worry too much. Your half-body armor of the Wind Empress is very effective against them. You should attack without holding back. Freya nodded. P.S. I overslept, so I'm a little late. Sorry. Please bookmark and recommend this. Everyone, please support me. Chapter 45. The 3 of them silently sneaked down from the top of the valley. Time seemed to have stopped as their movements were so subtle that one would not notice anything out of the ordinary even if they were in the middle of the valley. He had walked this route over 100 times. It was not that he had not been discovered before, but that was when he was not familiar with it. Compared to now, it was impossible. Although the demonic trees were strong and aggressive, they were naturally blind and were not good at scouting. Compared to light, the transmission of sound was slower. However, the tense Brando could still hear the rustling sound of his boots rubbing against the rocks. He turned around and saw Freya staring back at him nervously. The young man could not help but frown. "You are still too nervous, Freya." He stopped to let the Roman pass him. The merchant girl did a good job. She lowered her body and breathed evenly. Her steps were not too big or too slow. She was as graceful and nimble as a kitten. She did not make too much noise. Her spirit was also cautious and excited at the moment. Her tense heartstrings stimulated more of her body's potential. The Roman always thought of herself as a natural merchant and adventurer. "Roman, you did well. Keep it up." Brando silently encouraged her with his mouth. The merchant girl quickly nodded. Her movements were small, but it could not hide the pride in her heart. Brando let the Roman pass and his gaze fell on Freya behind him. The girl seemed to know her own condition and could not help but lower her head. The young man saw this and sighed silently. This future goddess of war did not have the most outstanding talent in any aspect. Her intelligence, judgment, psychological quality, and physical quality seemed to have unknowingly determined that she was an ordinary person. But only Brendel knew that she must have some kind of potential that would allow her to achieve that legendary title one day. He could not help but look at her carefully. When she lowered her head, he could see a head of light brown hair. The hair was loose and soft, and it looked like her owner took care of it very carefully. It was not exquisite, but it was very meticulous. At this time, Freya had already lowered her body and passed by him. The girl did not utter a word. Only her long ponytail moved up and down with her movements, as if expressing her unyielding spirit. Brando knew that this was a unique kind of stubbornness. His heart skipped a beat. "Freya." Freya's movements in front of him paused. "You're too nervous. Relax." "I'm sorry, It's all right. Do you see that rock in front of us? We should split up from here. Hide behind there. When the patrol team passes by, you must immediately divert the attention of the last two demonic trees." Freya nodded. "You go first, I'll watch you here, Freya. I believe you can do a good job." Brando turned over, lying on his side in a piece of gravel, and gestured to her. The girl finally couldn't help but reveal an expression of surprise. This was different from the previous arrangement. But she was not a fool. She knew that Brando stayed behind to cheer her on. She was slightly moved, but at this time, she could only purse her lips and nod. Brando saw that Freya continued to move forward, and her movements became more steady. Only then did he let out a sigh of relief. In fact, this kind of spontaneous reaction was very normal. There were not many people who were as gifted as the Roman. He turned around and saw that the merchant girl had stopped and looked at him with a curious face. He could not help but make a gesture to her to continue moving forward. Unfortunately, although her mental fortitude was top-notch, her thinking was too abnormal. Speaking of which, Freya was more reliable. He still looked forward to the day when the future goddess of war grew up. Freya quickly arrived at the predetermined position. The patrol team had just passed through half of the valley, and there were no accidents in the middle. Actually, there was no accident, but the girl was too nervous. But now, Brando was in a bit of trouble. Because he stayed behind to encourage Freya, he delayed a bit of time. Now, the demonic trees had circled around half of the valley and were entering their ambush range. At this distance, he was likely to be discovered. But Brando was Brando after all. He controlled the route and timing to the best, and there were no mistakes. When he crawled to Roman's side, even he could not help but wipe his sweat. He was really too nervous, but at least he did not let his emotions affect his performance. It was as perfect as in the game. Roman saw that he was sweating profusely, and hurriedly took out a checkered handkerchief from her bag and gave it to him. She did not say anything, but her thoughts were clear. Brando saw the checkered handkerchief and vaguely remembered that it was a handmade product from the northern Vero region. It was very rare to see similar goods in Butchie. It was also one of the merchant girl's favorite collections. "Thank you." He used his mouth to express his gratitude word by word. "I should be the one thanking you, Brando." The Roman girl hugged her bag with both hands and replied seriously, "It will be very dangerous later, and there will be some things that we will not have the chance to say, right? That's why I want to tell you." "Thank you, Brando." Brando was startled, and then smiled slightly. In this short period of time, the 6 demonic trees had already approached. The 3 of them hid behind the sharp rocks, but they could still hear the rustling footsteps getting closer and closer. The demonic trees used some low notes to transmit information, and the communication between them and the demonic trees was only completed through telepathy. Brando saw that Freya had unsheathed her sword. She used her clothes to wrap the blade so that the reflection would not alert the demonic trees. Brando nodded. At least from this point, he could see that Freya was no longer the little girl from a few days ago. He immediately made a hand gesture, which meant, "I'll go first, you sneak attack." Freya furrowed her brows. The other party always took on the most dangerous tasks, and this made her feel uneasy, and at the same time a little unconvinced. But even so, she knew that this was the most suitable choice, so she could only nod helplessly. The demonic trees passed through a promontory that extended out from the ground. Then, they stopped and started searching in all directions. They also made a series of strange notes to communicate with each other. Brando pulled out the Thorn of Light and used one hand to protect the Roman. Then, he sent an attack signal to Freya. At this moment, the demonic trees should be behind them, and they were spread out. This was the best time to attack. Brando was the first to rush out. His first target was the adult demonic tree. Then, it was Freya's turn. The girl decisively pulled out her sword and rushed towards the back of the demonic trees. Her target was the 2 golden demonic tree descendants that were standing closer to her. The demonic trees that stood at the back of the team were responsible for guarding, so their reaction was the fastest. The moment the 2 demonic trees discovered Freya, they turned around and let out a low growl. 4 vines shot out from their bodies like spears, and the vines pierced through the air with a shrill whistle. However, Freya parted her hands and blocked the 4 steel ropes. The wings of the wind glowed to protect her, allowing her to leap up and crash into the body of the first demonic tree. The wings of the wind dimmed for a moment, but immediately lit up again. However, the huge monster was also caught off guard and was sent flying. At this moment, the girl remembered Brando's words, "Your half-plate Wind Empress is very effective against them. You should attack with all your might." She clenched her teeth and pounced on the demonic tree that had fallen to the ground without any protection. The power of the demonic tree was like a tidal wave that wanted to send her flying. Freya knew that her strength was limited, and she could be sent flying at any time. She held her sword with both hands and raised it high. She aimed at the right arm of the demonic tree and slashed it down. With a light hiss, the right arm that was covered with vines was sent flying for a long time. However, Freya was also sent flying at the same time. Just as she got up, another demonic tree whipped her and she rolled a few times on the ground. Although the half-plate Wind Empress protected her, the impact still caused the girl to cough up blood. The demonic tree that had fallen to the ground would not be able to recover in a short time. Freya knew that she only had one enemy left. However, she wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth and could not find any opportunity to attack. She could not help but take a light breath. On the other side, Brando had killed the enemy that was caught off guard. The Thorn of Light in his hand was like a dancing silver thread. The first sword pierced into the demonic tree's right rib, and then he swung his sword outwards, turning the demonic tree's right arm and a few vines into ashes. The second sword cut off the demonic tree's 2 legs. The moment the demonic tree lost its balance and fell, the cold edge of the elven sword had already swept across its neck. The demonic tree was turned into ashes in the intertwining net of light. Of course, this was because he took advantage of the surprise attack. Now, he had to think of a way to deal with it. However, Brando had already planned for this. He immediately withdrew his sword and retreated. The demonic tree that had lost their comrade would not give up so easily. The three demonic trees immediately roared and chased after him. Brando had been waiting for this moment. When they chased him through a narrow path, the three demonic trees subconsciously lined up in a straight line to pass through. However, what awaited them was the shining silver ring on Brando's hand. OSS. Freya heard a terrifying explosion from behind her left. She knew that it was the sound of Brando's attack. She could not help but relax. At the same time, she noticed that the enemy in front of her was stunned by the loud explosion. As a young girl from the countryside of Butchie, she obviously didn't understand how big of an impact this sound explosion had on the sensitive demonic trees. The loud sound almost made them lose their ability to judge the outside world. It was as if the whole world was filled with a boundless white light, and nothing existed in the white light. However, she knew that this was an opportunity, and that was enough. She raised her corroded sword that was almost broken, and viciously slashed at the demonic tree's legs. The short battle seemed to have ended with this slash. With a crisp sound, the demonic tree's tall body and her sword were split into two. Freya could not believe that she had succeeded. She opened her mouth and saw the Roman panting while holding Madara's black steel sword in front of her. Roman. Freya, I'm sorry, Brando asked me to help you. The young girl smiled. It's okay, thank you. When Brando came out from behind the stone promontory, he saw this scene and could not help but be stunned. He originally thought that Freya was going to throw a tantrum, but unexpectedly, her reaction was not that big. Actually, his arrangement was not only to reduce the pressure on Freya, but also because of tactical considerations. This was because the focus of the ambush was on the ponytailed young girl. The entire demonic tree patrol team's focus was on their commander, the adult demonic tree, and the two demonic trees at the back of the team. As long as the two demonic trees were tied down, Brando could easily kill the adult demonic tree and lure the rest of the demonic trees away to carry out his plan. He did not want to give the enemy a chance to set up a formation and launch a counterattack. Otherwise, with 6 ranged monsters, even if Brando was 5 levels higher, he might not be able to protect Freya and Roman. But just as he was worried about how to explain it, Freya seemed to have understood. Why is the golden demonic tree not moving? The future Valkyrie also saw him and asked, "Can't it move?" Brando was stunned, and only then did he regain his senses. He shook his head. It was not that the golden demonic tree did not move. On the contrary, the moment they attacked and attracted the golden demonic tree's attention, the terrifying monster had already launched its counterattack. It was just a soundless act. We have 1 minute. I will explain to you how to deal with the golden demonic tree. You must listen carefully if you do not want your souls to be trapped in the golden demonic tree forever. He replied. P.S. I am very happy to see the few long reviews in the book review section. The results are not good enough. Please continue to support me. Chapter 46. Under the clear sky, it was the brightest sunshine since spring. At the Bragg's River, it should be like this in 4 or 5 months. The green meadow extended to the end of the river, the forest was filled with lush trees, and at the bend of the Golden River, a water wheel or a sawmill could be seen. The water was clear, and the pebbles on both sides of the river were carried downstream by the wind in the mountains to the Vero region. However, to the natives who were born and raised here, this river was like an endless poem that contained the wisdom of time. Brando thought so as he walked along the river, listening to the sounds in the forest. There was a bear in the forest, but it was not easy to see. In one of his memories, this was his grandfather's favorite place to bring him. But in another memory, this was the beginner's area that he was most familiar with. The forest was filled with small animals of a certain level, and the bear was a local boss that dropped a piece of good leather. The two memories merged and intertwined in his mind. The third memory was about the golden demonic tree. Looking at the familiar scenery, he could not help but think back to a few minutes ago. Freya, Roman. I'll keep it short. You should have noticed that the golden demonic tree is able to control so many demon servants and children through the mind. The true ability of the golden demonic tree is the power of the mind. The power of the mind. Roman, don't interrupt. I'm sorry, Freya. Yes, the power of the mind. It can pry into thoughts, control people's hearts, create mysterious illusions, and imprison souls. Brando replied, in fact, when we were dealing with the demonic trees, the golden demonic tree had already begun to influence our thoughts, because it has been having a long dream, and this dream will soon merge with you and me. Dream? Yes, soon we will enter our own dreams. You will see some unbelievable things there, but before that, I have something to tell you. Brando pointed to the center of the valley, and there, the golden demonic tree was becoming more and more beautiful in their eyes. Its branches seemed to stretch out in all directions, exuding a vigorous vitality. This was the manifestation of the golden tree's dream extending to the real world. In the game, the tree herders gave the golden tree the god's blood to awaken it, but it also caused the elven holy trees to fall into an eternal dream. These dreams were all fragments and bits of information about a dark world. Mortals would fall into madness even if they only took a peek. Even a fragment of these dreams could be fatal to players. Once players got involved, they could lose their lives at any time. However, in order to fight against the golden demonic tree, he had no choice but to enter its dreamscape. This would be the first stage of the battle against the golden demonic tree, the illusion realm. Originally, this stage of the battle was unanimously agreed by the players to be the most difficult in the game, but the guild called Muda used a clever method to solve the problem. This method was still a secret in the early days, but Brando happened to come from an era when it was widely spread among the players. Coincidentally, the resources he had with him were just enough to complete this plan. But this was still not enough. Because once the first stage was over, the second stage of the battle in the real world would depend on true strength to determine victory and defeat. Originally, this stage was relatively simple in the game, but on the contrary, it was difficult for Brando and the others to complete. There was no other reason. Most of the players in the game who entered this dungeon had an average level of 25 and above, but Brando, who was the highest level among the three, was only level 10. Even with the help of top-grade equipment, it would be difficult to end the battle before the rotten beasts arrived in 15 minutes. This was the reason why Brendel's abacus immediately shifted to the golden demonic tree when he held the card of fate, Holy Sword. Because as long as he used the card of fate well, it seemed that all the conditions to kill the golden demonic tree would be met. Main point. Freya's voice pulled him back to reality. Brando was stunned for a moment before he nodded. Because the golden demonic tree's dreamscape entered our dreamscape, you must remember that you are the master of this dream. Therefore, no matter how it constructs this dream, no matter how fierce the beasts it creates, it will not exceed your limits. He remembered that in the game, in this scenario, the golden demonic tree would release some of the strongest monsters that the players had encountered in the dream, and then recreate that scene. But it was not that simple. Here, the players would receive distress points, and when they made mistakes or suffered more injuries, the distress points would increase, and the monsters would also become stronger. Therefore, this battle would often be due to the monsters becoming stronger and the players becoming weaker and weaker. In the end, it would enter a vicious cycle, and the players would not be able to resist and it would be declared over. Brando did not know how the distress points would behave in the real world, but there was only one core. That was to be full of confidence in oneself, and to ensure that one would enter the battle in the best possible condition. Only then would one be able to obtain victory. He pointed at his own forehead and looked seriously at Roman and Freya. Focus your attention, and ensure that your fighting spirit is high. A person's willpower attribute. Don't interrupt, Roman. Brando replied unhappily, I'm talking about willpower. A person's willpower is not fixed. It will fluctuate according to your condition, and when you focus your attention and ensure that your fighting spirit is high, your willpower will always be at its peak. The stronger your willpower, the harder it will be for the golden demonic tree to manipulate your negative emotions. You must not be controlled by your negative emotions, or else the consequences will be very serious. How serious? The future merchant girl looked at him with her bright eyes. Brando did not answer. He was afraid that his words would make them too nervous. Nervousness was also a type of negative emotion. Because failure meant that the soul would be trapped in the golden demonic tree's trunk forever, until the golden demonic tree was burned to ashes. Only then would the soul be released. But release also meant death. The surroundings gradually became hazy. But Brando did not explain the rules, because there was a rule in this battle. When the first person woke up, he could enter the next person's dream and pass on a message to his companions, allowing them to defeat the nightmare more easily. But everyone in the team only had one chance, so the guilds would usually set up a chain of awakening. The strongest person in the team would be the first to enter the dream, then the second strongest, and the third strongest. This way, when the strongest person in the guild woke up first, they would be able to help the people below. This sequence would prevent the team from losing too many people in the first stage. Now, Brando planned to change this sequence. I'll be the first to enter the dream, he said, then Freya, and finally Roman. How do we enter the dream? Freya asked. You just have to close your eyes. I'll be the first to close my eyes, then you, then Roman. Brando almost bit his tongue. He immediately reached out his hand to press on Roman's eyelids, because he saw that the merchant lady was about to close her eyes to give it a try. Ah! Roman couldn't help but cry out when Brando's hand pressed on his forehead. Curiosity killed the cat, miss. So sorry. The world of magic and the mind is very dangerous, you have to be careful. Brando sighed. His plan was like this. He was the most confident, so he should be the first to enter the dream. Freya was behind him because he believed that the future goddess of war would be the most difficult to defeat. Because there were too many obstacles in her heart, the more dangerous it would be. But with an experienced person like him by her side, it shouldn't be too dangerous. On the other hand, the naive Roman should be able to escape the golden demonic tree's control easily. With Freya's help, success was inevitable. The time limit for the first stage was 5 minutes, and in the dream, it was extended to half an hour. If they couldn't escape in this time, they would still be trapped by the golden demonic tree. It seemed like a plan with a high chance of success. At least Brando didn't find any problems with it. If they succeeded, then other than the handsome rewards, they would have ample time to move around Fortress Reden. No one knew better than Brendel about Fortress Reden's current situation and what it would become in the future. If they wanted to find Romaine's aunt and escape successfully, every second they had was a little bit more hope. He patted the thorn of light on his waist and took a deep breath. The golden demonic tree's dream was very realistic, and when he took a deep breath, his lungs were filled with the smell of wet soil. It was the smell of March or April, the green grass and the growing forest. But why did the golden demonic tree's boss throw him here? Did it think that the strongest monster he met was the old brown bear in the forest? That was good, it was only a level 16 rare elite, he could easily deal with it. But in Brando's memory, the golden demonic tree wasn't that kind. On the contrary, these creatures that were distorted by the blood of God were the purest of evil creatures, and their evil was unreasonable. But calculating the time, it should be about time to trigger the storyline, right? Even though he had been in this world for a few days, Brando still used the word trigger subconsciously. It was just a habit. At this moment, he heard the sound of metal clashing. Brando's ears twitched. For someone like him who was familiar with swordsmanship, level 3 military swordsmanship, he could tell that it was a duel between two people. But it wasn't intense, and it seemed like they were just practicing. Brando didn't choose to avoid it, because he knew that there was no point in avoiding it in the dream. And avoiding danger meant cowardice, which was a negative emotion, and the golden demonic tree might take advantage of it. He followed the source of the sound and found that it came from behind the water wheel of the sawmill not far away. And when he got closer, his line of sight went around the towering water wheel, and he saw two people he didn't expect to see. It was an old man with a head full of silver hair and white sideburns. He wore a dark blue uniform and held a sword in his hand. Just by standing there, he naturally gave off a towering aura, like a mountain. But what made Brando's heart skip a beat was the old man's expression. There was a sense of dignity in his solemn expression, and if someone with a guilty conscience saw him, they would immediately avoid his gaze. The other person was a little boy holding a wooden sword. Perhaps he didn't look any different from an ordinary child, but in Brando's eyes, he had a different meaning. He immediately recognized that this was Brando, or more accurately, the young Brando. He was shocked and raised his head, immediately realizing who the old man was. That must be Brando's grandfather, a veteran of the November War, and a recipient of the Candlelight Medal. Damn, that's incredible. Although Erewhon is old, the Medal of the Holy Cathedral of Fire isn't that easy to obtain. But this time, the dream set by the golden demonic tree seemed to be different from the one in the game. Brando's heart tightened. But with this hesitation, he immediately felt that the aura of Brando's grandfather in front of him was becoming more and more stable, and it was beginning to affect his state of mind. Negative emotions. Brando immediately realized that he was unknowingly being affected. This was different from the game. After all, the system in the game couldn't control people's thoughts, but it was completely different here. This way, the battle would be much more difficult than in the game. Brando couldn't help but take a deep breath and press on his wallet. Fortunately, he still had his biggest trump card. Although it was unexpected, the situation was still under control. Thinking of this, he calmed down. The old man's gaze also stopped on him, and after a while, he opened his mouth and said, "Young man, do you have the qualifications to inherit everything from my grandson?" This sentence made Brando's body tremble slightly. P.S. This chapter and the next few chapters will reach the climax. I poured a lot of emotions into these chapters, and I cried as I wrote them. I hope everyone will like them. With tears in my eyes, please recommend them. Chapter 47. Brando was greatly shaken. This was his biggest secret in this world. Although he and Brando were one, it was still difficult to explain where the memories of the two lives came from. Although he had accepted everything, it was inevitable that there would be a knot in his heart. Who would have thought that this secret hidden in his heart would be torn apart by the golden demonic tree? That's not right, but he immediately shook his head. The golden demonic tree's spirit could not have penetrated into his heart so quickly. That monster was using his habits. Why would Brando's grandfather say something like that? Brando suddenly understood. It must be because he thought that the old man would say something like that. Only people would understand what they were afraid of, and in this world, his enemy was himself. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he realized that his spiritual defense line had not changed hands, the feeling of being exposed in front of the enemy disappeared, and he quickly calmed down. The golden demonic tree's first attack was coincidentally neutralized by him using his previous life's experience, and his spirit became even more stable. He could not help but cry out in relief. He pulled out the thorn of light and replied, "Whether I have the qualifications or not, we will know after a test." The old man nodded. Not bad, that's more like a man of the Damon family. However, there are too many people in this world who talk big, and I do not wish for my descendants to be such incompetent people. Brando's heart skipped a beat. This was not a test. Brando's grandfather's reaction was Brando's self-affirmation. This meant that his self-confidence was gradually recovering, and this was a sign that his spirit was reaching the peak of stability. This was a good sign. Brando signaled his grandfather to make the first move. Even if it was a dream, he was still facing his own elder. Out of politeness and self-confidence, he should also be courteous. In the golden demonic tree's dream, blindly taking the first move was not a sign of one's strength having the upper hand, but rather an undetectable trap that the evil creature had set for one. Only by guarding every weakness in one's human nature could one not let it take advantage of them. The old man nodded again. He took a step forward with his left foot and placed his sword behind his left arm. Brando could not help but feel his scalp tingle when he saw this. Even he himself had not reached this level of swordsmanship back then. As for Breton, Freya, and the others, their swordsmanship was nothing compared to this. Brando, who was your grandfather? As this thought flashed through his mind, Brando felt the sword in his hand become heavier. He couldn't help but curse out loud. His fear had actually been caught by the golden demonic tree. How was he supposed to live? He also assumed a defensive stance. As he did not have any other sword skills, he chose a more mature defensive stance from the military sword skills. In front of such a seasoned swordsman, it was meaningless for him to put on the airs of the high-level swordsmanship he had used in the past. Without the accumulation of experience, just putting on airs in front of Brando's grandfather was equivalent to saying that he was full of flaws. As an experienced warrior, Brando deeply understood this point. The old man did not say anything, and with a flash of his sword, he attacked. Brando discovered that his grandfather's sword was not fast, but it was steady, so steady that it was frightening. Using the words of a professional warrior to describe it, it was as if there were no flaws at all from the front. It was clearly an ordinary sword strike, but it felt as if all the gaps in the sword were within the range of the opponent's counterattack. He sucked in a breath of cold air. This was the swordsmanship that Brando remembered from his grandfather's memories. No wonder he was able to obtain the candlelight medal. This monstrous swordsmanship, no wonder Brando's talent in swordsmanship was so outstanding. It turned out that they came from the same lineage. He could not help but think that if this old man's background was slightly better, he would have been directly conferred the title of knight. Brando did not have any room to counterattack, so he could only seal off his opponent's space for further attacks. With a clang, the two swords collided. Such a strong force, Brando was secretly shocked. But before he could recover from his shock, he felt his opponent's sword become heavier. F***ck your mother's golden demonic tree. Of course, Brando knew what was going on. This was simply seamless. Compared to this, the golden demonic tree in the game was simply like a toy. What was a master at manipulating people? This was it. But at this moment, Brando did not feel afraid at all. Instead, he felt a strong desire to fight. He stared into his grandfather's eyes. The old man's expression had always been as calm as water, but it was as if he could see through people's hearts. Brando suddenly felt that it was very strange. Why would such an outstanding grandfather be so indifferent in Brando's heart? When he first saw this old man, he even had to rely on his childhood memories to confirm that this was indeed his grandfather. This was clearly not normal. He searched through his own memories. Brando's memories of his grandfather seemed to be that he was strict and unsmiling. Then there were the candlelight medal and the heavy halo of the veteran of the November War. And the other memories of this grandfather were not even as deep as the old house and the oil painting. But how could a grandfather and grandson who had been together for a few years become strangers when they met again? Even his grandfather's voice and appearance had gradually faded away. Brando did not seem like such a person. He once again blocked the old man's sword. Clang! The sound of metal clashing rang out. He felt the sword in his hand become heavier, and it almost flew out of his hand. Brando was shocked. He could not help but look at the old man. The old man's expression became serious, as if he was somewhat dissatisfied. 10 years, I am still not grandfather's match. Brando could not help but read the message in his heart. Not good, I am doubting myself. He was shocked. A crack appeared in his spirit defense line, and his attacks became more and more disorderly. He was actually knocked to the ground by the old man's attack. Our protagonist's heart turned cold, and he hurriedly climbed up from the grass. But when he climbed up and looked back, there was no grass. This was clearly a gray house. That's right, this was Butchie's old house. That night, he woke up here and came to this world. Brando's forehead was covered in cold sweat. This meant that the golden demonic tree's invasion had deepened. He could not help but reach for his pouch, which contained the key to overcoming the situation. But he hesitated. Should he use a trick? He suddenly felt a sense of unwillingness. He raised his head and looked at the old man's face. It was Brando's grandfather's face. The old man's face was still serious, and his wrinkled face had a hint of disappointment. This disappointment deeply pierced him. It was as if Brando's 20 years of memories had suddenly become clear. It was as if they wanted to leave his body and fight his grandfather alone. I can do it. Let me do it. He suddenly had such a thought. He knew that it was Brando's emotions that were affecting him. He had already integrated into this world, into the memories of his family. But he shook his head. No, maybe this was the golden demonic tree taking advantage of his weakness. He had to immediately use that technique to leave this dream. But when he put his hand on that position, he could not help but be shocked. Because he saw the disappointment on the old man's face become more and more obvious. No, I can't abandon Brendel. But you have to understand that the golden demonic tree is taking advantage of Brando's weakness, but even so, it is still a part of me. You will fail, but abandoning your weakness does not mean that you have won against yourself. Brando suddenly calmed down. He suddenly realized why Brando's grandfather did not say a single word from the moment he attacked. Although the old man had many chances to completely destroy Brando's psychological defenses, and although the old man's face was filled with disappointment, he did not say anything. But the old man didn't say anything. He just watched and waited quietly. Brando suddenly felt a bolt of lightning piercing through his soul, illuminating every dark corner of his heart. He suddenly understood that this was not because the golden demonic tree had pity for Brando. No, it was because that young man was still protecting the last piece of pure land in his soul. Then why? Brando could not help but raise his head to look at the old man's solemn, slightly sighing face. That face hidden in the shadows of the old house seemed to be hiding something. Was it disappointment? It was disappointment. His entire body suddenly trembled. What was that disappointment waiting for? It was unspoken hope, Brando. That was the grandfather in Brando's memories. That stern and deep gaze was filled with disappointment towards this young man's growth, but this deep disappointment was not blame. It was hope that one day, Brando would understand the familial love behind this hope. Family would never truly blame you. They would only wait for the day you understand. Perhaps one day, they would grow old, perhaps one day, they would no longer exist in this world, but they would still remain in your heart, waiting for the day you understand. Waiting for you to understand their love for you. Brando raised his head, his hand tightly gripping his sword. He raised his head, holding back his tears. He had always thought that he had understood this world, but he never thought that he did not understand anything. Brando, do you still remember what I told you? Your spine must be as straight as your sword. As a man of the Damon family, you must live with your head held high. You are my grandson. You are the best in my heart. The old man raised the sword in his hand again. Come, let me see what you've learned in the 10 years since I left. Brando nodded, his face already filled with tears. This was his grandfather's words, but it was also not. This was the answer he gave himself in his heart. This was the path that Brando wanted. He took a deep breath. The two swords crossed. Stand up, Brando. How can the men of the Damon family be so weak? What are you crying for? Can a scratch kill you? Tell me, how do you want me to punish you this time? In his memory, his grandfather should be the one who sat sternly in the position of a parent, silent, and looked at him with a disappointed gaze. In his memory, his grandfather should be the one who was always dissatisfied with everything he did. However, the old man in his memory had finally finished the last journey of his life. Brando stood in front of the wooden bed, feeling his grandfather's hand gently placed on his head, just like when he was a child by the Brags River. However, in the end, his grandfather's hand lost its strength and brushed across his young face. It was so rough, but it made people feel that they could rely on him. Was that sigh still a disappointment in the end, or was it a heavy responsibility and hope? Brando felt that his grandfather's dream was disintegrating around him, and he held the candlelight metal in his hand that was disappearing into specks of dust. He did not say anything for a long time. Thank you, old man. Thank you, grandfather. Requesting votes. Requesting votes. Chidian Chinese website welcomes readers to read the latest, fastest, and hottest serialized works from Chidian originals. Chapter 48. Waking up from his grandfather's dream, Brando opened his eyes and felt that his forehead was cold. He looked at the gloomy sky and couldn't help but let out a long sigh. In the game, there were ways to rely on equipment and skills that could instantly increase one's willpower to break free from the cage of willpower. For example, his innate talent was one of them. But he felt that this was not the best way to solve the problem. No matter what, he who had merged with Brando's memories could not give up the other part of his soul. He was not just one of the two, but the whole soul represented by Sophie and Brando. If he could not look at Brando's weakness, one day he would not be able to look at his own weakness. Only by understanding himself correctly could he fully accept the past. This kind of growth was not only in the mind. Just Brando's acknowledgement of his past had given him a lot of benefits. He did not expect that Brando's swordsmanship was actually taught by his grandfather. These memories of the past were sealed away by Brando's subconscious with a sense of self-abandonment. Until now, the memories of his childhood swordsmanship had finally been revived and integrated into his soul. What kind of swordsmanship was this? Brando had once sealed away the swordsmanship taught by his grandfather because he subconsciously thought that he was not qualified to use it. But even so, the swordsmanship talent that had seeped into his bones since he was a child still made him the undisputed leader of the Anzac militia. Our protagonist could not help but open his stats list and saw that it had become Militia, Military Swordsmanship, Level 3+1, Fighting Skills, Level 3, Tactical Theory, Level 0, Military Organization, Level 0. Training skills could not exceed the level of a profession, but the level of skills obtained through equipment and quests did not count. Level 4 Swordsmanship was the standard of a normal person who had practiced swordsmanship for 30 to 40 years. It was definitely not appropriate for an 18 or 19-year-old to have such a level. But Brando felt that as long as he completely absorbed the essence of his grandfather's swordsmanship, his military swordsmanship could reach level 4 by another 30% without a problem. And when he thought of the old man's swordsmanship, he felt a chill. That was at least level 10 Erwin's military swordsmanship. Brando's grandfather was really a legend. He sat up from the ground with mixed thoughts and couldn't help but look towards the center of the valley. The hazy feeling from the golden demonic tree dissipated a little, which meant that the power of the dreamscape was weakening. He turned back to look at Freya and Roman. Freya's eyes were closed, and she frowned occasionally. Romaine's face was pale, but her expression was calm. Fortunately, the situation was not as bad as he had imagined. The next step was to inject faith. As long as everything went smoothly, the golden demonic tree would not be that difficult to deal with. He crawled to Freya's side and pressed his finger between her eyebrows. After a moment of hesitation, he chose faith. The golden demonic tree used negative emotions to lure people into its trap, so players had to respond with positive emotions. Brando observed Freya's behavior and believed that the stubbornness and persistence on the surface were actually a layer of protection for the weakness in her heart. He hoped that the future Valkyrie could be more confident. Only confidence could make people mature. But he couldn't help but think that they did not guard against him at all. In this state, it would be very easy for him to take advantage of them. He could not help but look at Romaine and Freya, who were sleeping soundly, especially the latter's forehead that was as smooth as jade. He could not help but have the delusion of wanting to get close to her. Brando's heart thumped, and he quickly calmed himself down. Although he liked Romaine, he wasn't a shameless person. He rubbed his forehead, and his mind was filled with all kinds of strange thoughts. He couldn't help but think of his dream. After leaving the dreamscape, his mentality was completely different. That feeling of gaining something and losing something made him more mature. He knew that he would not turn back. The meaning of time was that after generations of repetition, everyone had to walk their own path. He was the same. After understanding Brando's goal, he also had to plan for his own future. Only he knew that the War of the Black Rose would end quickly. This war only lasted from the end of May to the end of July in the game, and the nobles were not willing to be involved in a war. This coincided with Madara's idea. The external invasion was an external manifestation of the country's internal changes, but Madara didn't want to provoke the entire Light faction, so retreating was inevitable. Since both sides on the battlefield were unwilling to fight for a long time, then the negotiation of peace was a done deal. But that was more like a farce. Brando knew that the heroine he was willing to fight for was not the current heroine. He was waiting for the Princess Regent to ascend the throne. Of course, he couldn't just do nothing. He thought that after the war ended, the royal family would definitely commend some people. On one hand, they would establish heroes, and on the other hand, they would appease the people. Maybe there would be a recommendation for the Basta Royal Cavalry Academy like in history. However, Brando wasn't interested in this recommendation. To be honest, he wasn't interested in joining Erwin's old system, but it was a good idea to let Freya study there. What was he going to do? Brando couldn't help but think that this was the beginning of a chaotic world. After all, a person's strength was limited. He needed a territory, and he needed to gather some people to support his ideals. He knew that with his knowledge of history and the world, he would be able to quickly grow his territory, but where should he start? Should he go through Erwin's internal system? Not to mention that he didn't have enough time, he also didn't want to be involved in a war too early. He had to keep a low profile so that he wouldn't be noticed by the truly powerful forces. As for taking over a mountain and becoming a king, there was no need to think about it. The reason was the same as above. The other way was to go down the path of a pioneer. There were pioneers in the game, and there were also pioneers in real life. In this dark world, not all territories were under the control of the nobles. At the borders of the kingdom, where civilization and wilderness intersected, there were still many undeveloped virgin lands. Erwin had such a decree since the beginning of the Ain dynasty. As long as a pioneer discovered a new territory, he or she could immediately legally occupy it, and he or she would be awarded a title according to the size of the territory. These titles weren't hereditary, and most of the land would be taken back by the royal family and the Holy Cathedral after 3 generations. However, there were still many who were willing to seek an opportunity to make a name for themselves. Among them, there were gamblers, adventurers, mercenaries, illegal merchants, and even Templar knights and clergymen with proper backgrounds. There was no difference between them here. Brando couldn't help but get excited when it came to such virgin lands. He knew that there were many at the borders of Erewhon. Although there were differences in size, at least it was a choice. However, when it came to the selection, our protagonist couldn't help but hesitate. He didn't need much of a development advantage or geographical location. The key was to be hidden, and it was best to start from the few territories with ruins. After all, he was alone and lacked manpower and resources. Through the ruins of cities in the game, he could save a lot of effort. He thought for a moment and finally thought of a place. That place was known as the most legendary territory in the game. Later, because of the owner's mistake, it was burned down by his enemies. However, this place was still discussed enthusiastically on the forums for a long time. He remembered that he had seen countless people say, if Valhalla was still there, it would be a different scene now. Brando couldn't help but get excited when he thought of this. How could he not have thought of this before? If that legendary territory wasn't destroyed, its final development would be beyond everyone's expectations. He didn't expect that this daydream would come true in his hands. While he was daydreaming, he suddenly felt the person beside him move slightly. Then Freya opened her eyes. She saw Brando put a hand on her forehead and was slightly startled at first. But then the confusion in the future Valkyrie's eyes faded like the tide. She suddenly woke up and shrunk back, looking at Brando with a red face. Even if she didn't speak, Brando could see clearly what was written on her face. Shameless, what are you doing? He shook his head and was about to explain, but Freya seemed to have reacted first. She seemed to have suddenly remembered something, and the blush on her cheeks deepened. I'm sorry, it's okay, go give Roman an alarm clock and tell her to get up. Brando pretended to be relaxed and replied. Alarm clock. Brando coughed and realized that he had said something wrong. Then he explained in detail the reason and use of the faith injection. He thought it was a simple matter, but he didn't expect Freya's face to change after hearing it. Why don't you give Roman first? She stood up nervously and asked. Brando was stunned. No matter how you look at it, you're the one with a weak heart, Valkyrie. But before he finished thinking, Freya had already rushed over and helped Roman up from the ground. Romaine's face was still pale, but her expression was calm. But Brando was surprised to see that when Freya helped the soft Romaine up, 2 lines of tears fell from her eyelashes. What's going on? He couldn't imagine Roman crying. I'll tell you later. Freya took a deep breath and put a hand on Roman's forehead, but there was no reaction. She was stunned for a moment and immediately said, Turn your head. What for? Turn around, hurry up, don't look. Brando was stunned, but immediately nodded. But his curiosity was no less than Romaine's when she was awake. After a while, he couldn't help but sneak a peek behind him. He immediately saw Freya holding Roman with both hands and hugging him. She touched his forehead and anxiously muttered, Little Roman, wake up, did you forget our promise? He couldn't help but be stunned. He knew that Freya and Roman had a good relationship, but he didn't expect that Romaine would have her own little secret. But before he could recover from his shock, he saw Freya staring at him fiercely. Sorry, he saw it himself. Brando avoided the topic. You're shameless. Freya scolded with a red face. Sorry. P.S. There was a power outage in the morning, so it was a bit late. Regarding the explanation of the deletion in the book review section, some of the posts were deleted because of inappropriate words, so they weren't deleted randomly. Please forgive me. Chapter 49. However, the Roman situation was not as optimistic as Brando had imagined. As time passed, the atmosphere became more and more tense. Brando finally understood that this future merchant girl's heart must be hiding a secret that he did not know. This secret might be subconscious, and the deeper it was hidden, the greater the damage would be. For a moment, only the sound of their breathing could be heard. The merchant girl was sleeping peacefully, but Brando was afraid that she would never wake up again. He could not help but look at the golden demonic tree. The connection between the dream and reality was very weak, and the golden demonic tree could wake up at any time. Freya. Freya clenched her fist and was so nervous that she could not say a word. Brando had said that they only had 5 minutes, and there was not much time left, but the Roman still seemed to be immersed in his own nightmare. But she knew that she could not blame the young man, because she was the only one in Butchie who knew this secret. She hated herself for not telling Brando in advance, but how would she know that the dream was so complicated? Brando did not say anything because he was afraid that it would affect their state of mind, but he did not expect that it would backfire on him. However, the young man did not fall into a state of panic. His thoughts turned quickly, and he suddenly threw the thorn of light in his hand over. Let her hold it. What? This sword has the power of exorcism, let her hold it. Brando said that, but he knew that he could only rely on the elven treasure sword. An increase of 1 willpower would allow the merchant girl to turn the misfortune into a blessing. Martha above. He could not help but pray to the omnipresent wound in his heart, hoping that she would be more lenient towards the Roman. But perhaps the sword had an effect, or perhaps Brando's prayer was heard by Martha. Not long after, the merchant girl actually woke up with a mm. She rubbed her eyes and looked at the two of them. She was stunned for a moment before she happily said, Freya, you're here too. Let me tell you, I just had a nightmare. Ah! Freya was stunned, and then she let out a surprised cry from her chest. She didn't even listen to what Romain was saying. Instead, she hugged the Roman and cried tears of joy. She thought that there was no hope, but Brando's method really worked. Roman, you idiot. Phoo, Freya, what are you saying? I'm not an idiot. Roman defended himself in a fluster as if he had been dealt a fatal blow. On the other hand, Brando calmed down when he saw that Freya was flustered. With the help of faith and thorn of light, no matter how deep the nightmare was, the Roman would have a high chance of waking up. He was more worried about how she would be affected. But looking at her dazed expression, Brando knew that he was overthinking things. All right, don't cry. He said, the golden demonic tree is about to wake up. If you have anything to say, save it for after the battle. The ponytailed girl stopped crying and nodded. What should we do, Brando? She asked. We are not the main characters of this battle. There is a stone worm in this valley, what is that? Roman, don't interrupt. The stone worm is a type of elemental creature from the Earth's pivot, Earth elemental plane. They are born to be the nemesis of the golden demonic tree, but before this stone worm reaches adulthood, the golden demonic tree can still rely on its huge roots to keep it outside the valley. Of course, the stone worm needs 80 to 120 years to reach adulthood. We can't wait that long, so we have to help it. Help it? Freya asked. Brando took the elven sword from Roman and answered, the golden demonic tree's body is very weak. Its only attack is to use its roots to pierce through the ground. So we have to force it to do this. The more roots it uses, the less roots it has to defend against the stone worm. Over time, the stone worm will be able to enter the valley, but we only have 10 minutes. At most, the first batch of rotten beasts will enter the valley in 10 minutes. If we don't succeed in 10 minutes, you have to run west without hesitation. That secret passage is in the valley, and it is very obvious. What about you? Roman looked up. Leave the rest to the men. This is the demeanor of a lady. Brando looked at her smooth forehead and couldn't help but lightly touch it. He then looked at Freya. The girl was using both her hands to tie up her ponytail to facilitate the battle. She noticed his gaze and nodded at him. Brando was stunned. He thought that Freya would force herself to stay. But she didn't look like she was unwilling. Instead, she looked more calm. It seemed that she had gained something from the dream. The capable Freya had the aura of a future Valkyrie. He couldn't help but smile, then turned back and said, "Roman, put on your ring." Immediately, Romaine raised her hand proudly and waved the black and white ring in front of him. "Your mission is to listen to the movements underground. If you find anything, immediately tell us." "Okay, Brando. Then let's go. We will go through the rocky promontory and approach the golden demonic tree. Looking at the terrain, there should be a fault below that will delay the golden demonic tree from noticing our intentions," Brando said as he took the lead. He first ran to a protruding rock, then turned back and gestured to Freya and Roman to follow him. Freya grabbed Roman's hand and followed him. Her meaning was obvious: be good and don't run around, I will protect you. She did this to let Brando have nothing else to worry about, so that he could take the opportunity to attack the golden demonic tree. The three of them quickly passed through the rocky promontory that Brando had mentioned. His memory was correct, and they hadn't been disturbed at all. But just as they entered the boundary, Romaine immediately heard a rumbling sound coming from below. "Brando, there's a sound below." Our protagonist was shocked and immediately shouted, "Split up, split up." Freya immediately pushed Roman to the side. The three of them split up, and the ground was immediately torn apart by two thick vines. However, the golden demonic tree didn't expect that its attack would be seen through by a few insects. When its roots reached out from the ground, it was only waiting for Brando's sword. The youth climbed up from the ground and raised the elven sword with both hands. He slashed at the center of the vines that were as thick as a water bucket, and the sword went halfway into the vines. Silver flames immediately gushed out from the tip of the sword. The purifying flames burned the vines, and the golden demonic tree in the middle of the valley trembled in pain, causing the entire valley to hum. "It's calling for reinforcements again." Brando's heart sank. As expected, time was running out. He couldn't help but turn back. Freya had beautifully dodged the golden demonic tree's roots, and slashed at the vines with her sword. Even though the sword only went a third of the way into the vines, it was a beautiful move that made him look at her in a new light. This was at least the standard of a level 2 arrow in military swordsmanship. It seemed like Freya had gained quite a lot from her dream. "Brando, there's a sound again." Roman crawled to the edge of the battlefield and shouted back. "How far is it?" Brando instinctively shouted, but he immediately realized his slip of the tongue. He had unconsciously treated the Roman as the team's nightingale, but the merchant girl was only a little more sensitive and was not a professional scout in the game. 100 meters, maybe 70 meters. Roman thought for a while. That far. Brando was startled, and used his sword to deflect the vines that were attacking him. The remaining half of the roots lost its vitality and fell limply to the ground. The area where it was cut was charred black. "There's still 60 meters left." Brando hesitated for a while. Even though he found it hard to believe, he still decided to trust the Roman. "Freya, don't worry about it. Do you see that small path? We'll rush out from there." Freya was startled for a moment, but she immediately placed her sword in front of her chest and let the vine whip her away. The wings of the wind that surrounded her lit up one by one, forming a net of light that protected her and lessened the impact. The ponytailed girl only rolled a few times on the ground before she got up, and she had already landed beside Roman. "Roman, follow me." She then grabbed the merchant girl's hand and rushed in that direction. Hey. Where's Brando? He'll catch up." This girl finally learned to trust her teammates and not to be stubborn. Brando couldn't help but feel relieved. He was really afraid that Freya would get mixed up with him at this time. But when he saw that the vine attacking Freya still wanted to chase after her, he didn't hesitate to cut it in half. After clearing the enemy, he didn't dare to stay any longer. He could clearly hear the sound from underground, which meant that the Roman's judgment was correct. But he couldn't help but be shocked. How did the careless girl hear the sound from 70 meters underground? He estimated that her perceptive sense had to be at least 5 ounces to be able to do so. This thought flashed through Brando's mind, and he immediately turned around and ran. With his agility, it wasn't difficult for him to catch up to Freya and Roman, but the three of them were blocked by the golden demonic tree's roots. On the third time, the three of them heard a loud noise coming from the southeast of the valley, and all the tree roots that were attacking them suddenly retreated. Now, even if Brando didn't remind them, Freya and Roman knew that it was the stone worm. Did we win? Roman couldn't help but ask in surprise. Brando shook his head. They still had to enter the core area around the golden demonic tree. In the following time, the golden demonic tree would constantly consider which side posed a greater threat to it, and then use its huge roots to block one side. But this kind of action wouldn't last long, and there would be a moment when they would win. But the only question was whether they could do all this within the stipulated time. There were less than 5 minutes left. P.S. After going to Sanjiang, there are a lot of problems. Please recommend me. Chapter 50. A rumbling sound came from the south, followed by another half a minute later. Brando listened carefully and confirmed that the rock worm had passed through the rocky valley. The creature's mouth was filled with 13,000 steel needle-like teeth. Not only could it easily pierce through the soil, it could also chew through the hardest rocks. Brando had seen an adult rock worm before. It was about 30 meters long and required 3 people to encircle it. These creatures from the rock worm had shockingly high defense. 40 ounces of Bran's greatsword couldn't even break through its shell, let alone cause any damage. The golden demonic tree boss had sent the rock worm straight in, which meant that it had shifted its focus to the 3 of them. Brando couldn't help but curse. The rock worm was about a mile away from the center of the forbidden orchard where the golden demonic tree was rooted. The rock worm would need at least 20 minutes and 30 seconds to pass through the ground. The 3 of them had already entered the core of the forbidden orchard. If the golden demonic tree didn't interfere, they would be able to see the main body of the golden demonic tree as long as they went around the cracked area. There were still 2 minutes left. But he knew that the golden demonic tree would definitely try to stop them. Sure enough, before he could finish his thought, the solid ground under his feet let out a cracking sound. At such a close distance, the golden demonic tree's roots covered the ground, so they moved without warning. The Roman's ability couldn't be used at all. The 3 of them felt their bodies sinking. Brando, who was already prepared, stabbed his elven sword into the ground and supported Romain with one hand. He looked to the side and saw Freya half squatting on the ground to stabilize her body. But before the 3 of them could breathe a sigh of relief, the ground sank again. This time, it was obvious that the rock worm had torn a hole in the ground. What is it trying to do? The ponytailed girl almost fell backwards and couldn't help but ask nervously. It wants to kill people. Be careful and run with me. Brando pulled the Roman up from the ground and pulled out his sword. He half-hugged Romain and leaped forward. They rolled twice on the ground to avoid the hole that the golden demonic tree had created with its roots. The Roman was protected by the young man's body. His face was as red as an apple, and his eyes were wide open. He didn't even dare to breathe loudly. On the other side, Freya seemed like she wanted to jump over, but the golden demonic tree wasn't to be trifled with. It used its roots to pull the ground, causing her chest to hit the ground. If it wasn't for Brando quickly, she would have sunk into the ground with the soil and rocks. Thank you. Freya shook off his hand and bowed her head in reply. Now's not the time to talk about this. Brendel pulled out his sword and cut a whip in half. But soon, more snake-shaped roots appeared in front of them, and the hole behind them was slanting downwards. It seemed that the boss was determined to teach them a lesson. But Brando was used to these tricks. He couldn't help but think that other than giving him a surprise in the first stage, this blockhead didn't seem to be able to do anything new. The ability to tear the ground apart was a large area of effect in the game, but it wasn't without weaknesses. "Watch carefully," he said to Freya while holding the Roman tightly. He stared at the roots that were sweeping towards them. Brando leaned to the side to let the whip pass in front of him. He reached out and grabbed it tightly. The golden demonic tree didn't expect this and hurriedly rolled up its roots in an attempt to throw Brando away. But the young man didn't let go. He hugged the Roman tightly and moved up and down. The boss of the Seville mountain path finally lost its patience. It raised its roots and wanted to throw Brando to his death, but Brando took the opportunity to let go and jumped back. When he landed, he was already 34 meters away from the hole. His 3.7-ounce strength allowed him to have 4 times the strength of a normal person. His 2.9-ounce dexterity allowed him to be more agile than a mountain ape that could walk on the treetops as if they were flat ground. These attributes allowed him to complete this series of actions without any difficulty. When he landed, his strong muscles, bones, and organs absorbed the impact. If it was a normal person, their organs would have been shattered, but for him, it was only a slight discomfort. This was the benefit of increasing his body's attributes. Brando knew that everything he did before was not in vain. He had accumulated his attributes bit by bit for this moment. Brando immediately turned around and shouted to Freya, "Follow me." Then, without stopping, he grabbed the stumbling Romaine with one hand and rushed towards the golden demonic tree with one sword in hand. "Brando, wait. I can't keep up." But Brando didn't care about what she said. He turned the corner, and the ground suddenly split open. A large number of roots shot out from the ground and formed a huge net. The golden demonic tree was behind this net. There was less than a minute left. Brando paused, and the Roman behind him also stopped and gasped for breath. She raised her head and looked curiously at the golden demonic tree. No matter how she thought about it, she felt that it must be the golden apple tree of the gods. Brando looked at the net. It was exactly the same as the one in the game. He drew a circle in front of him with the elven sword, and the 2 serpents that were sweeping towards him ignited and split into 4 parts. The military swordsmanship was wide open. There weren't many defensive moves, but there were a few that were very refined. Then he let go of the Roman and took a step back. He raised his sword with both hands and took a step forward. Power burst. Brando felt excessive power being drawn out from his upper arm, forearm, trapezius, and latissimus dorsi, causing the elven sword to draw a beautiful silver arc. The sword moved forward and hit the net with a strength of 7 ounces. This was the scene that Freya saw when she limped over from the back. She had always thought that she had seen his limit every time she saw him. Last time it was because he used a magic card to cheat, but this time she really saw that kind of power erupt. The tip of the sword squeezed the air to both sides, creating a rapid sonic boom. The net of roots of the golden demonic tree was torn open with a sizzling sound, and the entire net collapsed from the middle. The trapped beast of the Seville mountain path could no longer stop the 3 of them, and could only watch as they broke through. Brando shouted to the Roman and Freya as soon as he entered the core area of the Forbidden Orchard, "You 2 go attack its roots, leave the main body to me." After that, he took out the card of fate and said in his heart, "Show me the holy sword." Even in summer, Winterclaw Castle was shrouded in a thin layer of frost. It was originally built in the high-altitude mountains of Corvado to monitor the barbarians in the forest from the north, but after the establishment of Balta province, it became one of the villas of the royal family. In the diamond-shaped courtyard of the castle, there was an ancient pine tree. It had miraculously survived a fire in Winterclaw Castle in the last century. The owner of the castle thought that it was a good omen, so he rebuilt the fortress and kept the tree. Now, under the pine tree, a solemn atmosphere was spreading. A little girl wearing a thick knight's uniform had beautiful silver hair, and her half-pointed ears proved that she had a part of the bloodline outside of humans. But unlike the elf's arrogance and gentleness, this 15-year-old girl had a solemn expression on her face. Both of her hands clenched onto a black long sword, and her posture was the defensive stance of Oween's cavalry swordsmanship. She pursed her lips and ordered a younger boy in front of her, "Haruz, attack me." Simple and unquestionable. "Sister, attack." The boy could only bite the bullet and thrust his sword at her. But the girl smoothly pressed down the tip of his sword, and then took a step forward and pressed her hand on his chest, directly pushing him to the ground. The servants around her gasped. Again. The girl's expression did not change as she said, "Sister, stand up, again." The little boy could only stand up and take a step back. He gritted his teeth and rushed forward again, but the girl in the knight's uniform changed the sword from her right hand to her left hand, and with a wave of her hand, she actually knocked the boy's sword away. "Why are you distracted?" "Sorry." Again. 10 minutes later, the girl walked into the changing room and asked two maids to take off her heavy knight's uniform. Hot steam and sweat steamed her beautiful silver curly hair. She did not turn her head and asked, "Where is father?" "Madara's envoy has arrived, Your Highness. His Majesty is secretly meeting with Marquis Kluge." The other maid lowered her head and replied. The girl glanced at herself in the mirror, and her face was cold and expressionless. She changed into a dress, put her hands behind her long silver hair, and threw it back. She raised her head and replied, "Take me to see Gemmer." She silently thought that there might be a turning point in the war, but Marquis Kluge, that cunning old man, was not worthy of her trust. Of course, there were some words that did not need to be said in front of the servants. She needed to find a trusted aide. "Yes, Your Highness." This day was the year of flowers and summer leaves, early June. Brando looked at the branches of the golden demonic tree that were gradually losing their color and weakly drooping down. He knew that this terrifying monster had finally reached the end of its life. He felt a little tired. Paying 2 points of MP to maintain the effects of the holy sword had almost drained all of his mental capacity. After all, he was a warrior, not a wizard. Even a magus at this level would only have around 10 points of magic power. Freya and Roman sat at the side, exhausted. Freya's arm was slightly injured, but it was not serious. Moreover, this injury was more exciting than defeating a powerful enemy. They could not help but turn back to look at Brando. But they saw Brando take a step forward, and the elven sword drew an arc and slashed at the trunk of the golden demonic tree. Power burst. The dying golden demonic tree that had lost the power of the blood of God was just an ordinary ancient oak tree. It was unable to resist the terrifying power of 7 ounces. The tearing power directly tore off half of its canopy, causing the canopy to break and fly away. The two girls gasped, not understanding what Brando was doing. But Brando knew that the golden demonic tree would hang the creatures it killed in the canopy and slowly drain them of their MP. After a long period of accumulation, there would still be some spoils of war. Although most of them had already been drained of their MP and turned into trash. Brando walked over, and the first thing he saw was the card on the ground. P.S. Currently, the clicks on the starting point only count as membership points. Please log in when you are reading this book. Thank you. It would be even better if you could give me your recommendations. Chapter 51. When the dust settled, the first thing he saw was a card that was about the size of a palm. He picked up the card. The front of the card was painted with a tree. It was tall and majestic, and mysterious veins extended from the trunk to the crown of the tree. On the top left of the card was a 7, but there was no elemental crystal symbol. He was stunned for a moment, but now that he knew how to deal with such things, he immediately opened the attribute data and scanned it. The description of the cards was changed to a different way: Sacred Tree, Secret Land, Elven Forbidden Land 7, Basic Land, Forest, produces 1 water EP into the elemental pool every week. Tap, construct the terrain of the forest. My soul returns to its homeland. This set of cards is called Elven Forbidden Land. Brando was stunned for a moment. The description of the card did not state the conditions for this card to work. Could it be that as long as it entered his deck, it would naturally produce 1 water EP every week? But what if he did not have the elemental pool? And tapping this card to construct a forest was also debatable. Of course, he would definitely not experiment here. Although once the golden demonic tree fell, its magic servants would scatter like birds and beasts, and would quickly wither due to the loss of magic supply. Perhaps one of the demonic trees could take root in another forest and continue the ecosystem, but that had nothing to do with Brando. Brando was worried that after the stone worm absorbed the scattered earth EP and magic, it would come to trouble the 3 of them. Elemental creatures did not have enough to eat. He put the card away and remembered the magic resonance from before. There must be another card that belonged to the night deck here. Unfortunately, the magic resonance was natural and could not be triggered repeatedly. Otherwise, he could use this method to search for it. Brando asked Freya and Roman to collect some acorns from the golden demonic tree. The ripe acorns could be used to make high-grade magic potions, which were also the most luxurious consumables in the game. Unfortunately, a golden demonic tree could only produce 7 or 8 ripe acorns at most. It was impossible to do it once and for all. He walked to a place, flipped the leaves, and found a pair of gloves wrapped around the aerial root. He could tell that it was a protective glove just by looking at the style of the glove. The protective glove provided 2 points of defense in the game, but it had a strength requirement. Brando vaguely remembered that it was 2. 5 energy rank, and when he touched it, he felt that it was quite heavy, so he was sure that he had guessed correctly. He tossed the glove to Freya to test it out, hoping that the latter would be more of a meat shield. Unfortunately, the ponytailed girl's hands sank as soon as she caught the glove. It was too heavy. The future Valkyrie had no choice but to return it with a look of pity. What a pity. Brando shook his head. With this and the Wind Empress half-body armor, swordsmen below iron rank will not be able to hurt you. I'm sorry. What's there to be sorry about? I think only a few of the guards can wear them, Brando said as he put on the gloves. The ponytailed girl noticed this detail and couldn't help but feel a little surprised. Does this mean that Brando is already one of the best in the guards? Of course, she didn't know that even Bennett was no match for Brando at this moment. The 3 of them searched the fallen tree in a clockwise manner. The Roman found a nimble dagger with +0. 1 energy rank, while Freya found a priceless 22-ounce enchanted ring. She only needed to use a little mana to activate it and she would be able to add a layer of flames to her dagger. As for the rest, most of them were waste products that had already lost their magic. Brando used the elven sword to peel off the skin of the golden demonic tree and found the heart of the golden tree. To his disappointment, the heart of the oak tree was still in the form of a tree crystal due to the difference of 3 years in the game. Of course, it was much purer than the average tree crystal. But materials were materials, and equipment was equipment, there was an uncrossable gap between them. This unexpected discovery made Brando alert. He couldn't use the perspective of many years in the game to look at things in the present. After all, this was a real world, and history was moving forward slowly. When Brando took out the heart of the golden tree, he felt as if a breeze was blowing through the valley. The golden demonic tree was dead. He raised his head and saw 8 silver balls of light flying out from the trunk and into his chest. 800 EXP. Brando couldn't help but stare blankly for a moment. 800 EXP wasn't a lot, but it was still a huge blow to him. After all, EXP in this world was real, and it was a power that could make him stronger. Thus, compared to the game, he was more excited every time he gained EXP. He could clearly feel that he was growing bit by bit from battle after battle. While Brando was immersed in his own thoughts, he saw Romaine running over as if she was presenting a treasure. She carefully held an item in her hands and showed it to him. The equipment they found before were all appraised by Brando. The young man could tell what it was, where it came from, how to activate it, and whether it had any magic. At this time, Brando had become a synonym for omnipotence in the Roman's heart. "Brando, you're looking for this, right?" She held the card and asked carefully. Brando looked at the card in her hands. The pattern of the card was gray, and there was a drawing of a tall knight and his robed squire. The color of the card was the same as the background of his holy sword card. Brando immediately realized that this was the card he was looking for. He took a look at it, and it was as expected. Highland Squire, Knight 9, Water Elemental 1, Creature, Human Scholar, Level 8 Creature. When Highland Squire enters the field, 1 prestige per week. Maintenance cost: for every day this card is in the field, 1 water elemental will be paid. Highland's Courage. This was a summoning card. Even if Brando was slow, he could guess it at this moment. This Highland Squire was a scholar, and the description of the card was Highland's Courage. It must be referring to the apprentice squire of the Karsuk Highlands. The wizards of Karsuk and the knight had been allies for 2 centuries. A level 8 scholar was not strong. However, if used well at a critical moment, it would be a great help. He could not help but look at the Roman who was looking at him expectantly. He smiled and said, "Thank you. This is very useful to me." "You're welcome," Romaine said happily. But at this time, Freya ran back from the north and said with a worried face, "Brando, Roman, I think I saw a rock worm coming from the north. Should we avoid it?" Rock worm. Brando was stunned. He wanted to let everyone rest, but he did not expect the rock worm to come so quickly. Although the rock worm might not attack them, most people would choose the safer way in this situation. He nodded and said, "You guys go first. I'll make some arrangements to prevent that thing from catching up." The rock worm used magic to smell and vibrate to determine the location of its prey. Therefore, using magic items to attract its attention could be used. Brendel waited for Romaine and Freya to leave before he took out the bottle of number 5 holy water. He used the Thorn of Light to open a hole at the bottom and placed it in a crack between the rocks. He looked around to make sure he did not miss anything before he retreated to the west alone. He thought that because of the previous magic resonance, Madara might send a small team to investigate the situation here. But by then, the rock worm would teach those skeletons an unforgettable lesson. It could be considered as revenge for Breton's group. It was June of the year of summer leaves and flowers. History was progressing according to Brando's expectations. Madara's secret envoy arrived at Winterclaw Fort. King Erwin Ober VI accepted Marquis Kluge's suggestion and refused to meet the envoy. Therefore, the First War of the Black Rose quickly entered its second phase. On the battlefield, Karsuk province was facing Madara's Winter Solstice and Black Raven legions. Duke Ogden even sent a messenger to cry that if they did not receive reinforcements in a short period of time, their morale would collapse. At the same time, further north, between the Kelman Mountains and the sea, an undead army was secretly advancing. In the southern Grenoires province, Insursta's army was attacking Fort Vermeer day after day. On the other hand, the Butchie region fell into an eerie silence. The commander, Count Pula, had sent a letter to the 104th Swordsman Regiment stationed at Fort Reedon. "Everything is fine." It was June 1st. At this time, Brando, Freya and the rest were passing through the secret passage under the Forbidden Orchard. They were rushing towards Fort Reedon as fast as they could. In fact, they had already discovered traces of undead activity along the way, but the scale was very small. It seemed more like undead scouts were approaching Fort Reedon. This made the atmosphere in the group tense. They were one step ahead of Madara's main force, but no one knew how big this step was. At midnight, Brando brought Freya and the Roman through the last section of the Zavale mountain path. By the time they reached a small hill called Findeck Hill, south of Fort Reedon, the wind of the night brought them into the Pine Valley, which stretched as far as the eye could see. It was the confluence of the Pine River and the Wesley River. The lights of Fort Reedon were like a shining jewel embedded in the darkness, quietly lying in the valley a few miles away, lighting up the entire riverbank. Seeing this scene, Freya and Romain held their breaths. They had always wondered what kind of place Fort Reedon was, but they didn't expect that a spark in the darkness could be so beautiful. At this time, Romain poked Brando's back and whispered, "Brando, there's an army behind us." "An army?" "Yes, look north from here. We passed by that valley in the afternoon. Can you see it? That's more than 10 miles away. How can I see it clearly in such darkness?" "My lady, don't joke with me at this time." Brando was stunned and said in a bad mood. "But I can see it." Chapter 52. Brando, Roman might be telling the truth. Freya reminded him. Brando knew that Roman might be telling the truth. He had seen her sharp senses before. But he thought to himself, "I'm just joking to lighten the mood. If the future goddess of war is always so serious, you will grow old quickly." He couldn't help but look back at Roman. Romain also looked back at him. To be honest, her curious gaze was sometimes a little embarrassing, especially for someone with a guilty conscience. But Brando liked this girl from the bottom of his heart. She was different in his eyes, and he thought that she was surprisingly cute. He thought for a moment and replied, "Let's stop here for a while." "Stop for a while?" Freya asked, "But Madara's army is right behind us. They will arrive after us in 2 or 3 hours. We don't have much time left, Brando." But Brando took out the seal ring from his pocket and waved it in front of them. He replied, "It's the middle of the night, and the city will be under martial law. This alone doesn't mean anything. If we are treated as spies from Madara, then it's all over. Then, what should we do?" Freya thought that her efforts would at least be of some use. Brando looked at her. He knew that he was talking nonsense. What if Fortress Reedon didn't discover Madara's invasion? Not necessarily. The nobles wouldn't neglect their own safety. They would just rather hide in the city and wait for reinforcements. He remembered that in the year of the cave beasts, 342, the blood staff swept through the eastern part of Karsuk, and the undead army left nothing behind. The city lord of Silverhorse ordered the city gates to be closed, and ignored the requests for help from the eastern part of the city. This led to a large number of poor peasants migrating to the west, and that area was still barren and uninhabited to this day. But even so, the nobles weren't reprimanded in the slightest. In other words, the royal family was already powerless to criticize the nobles before Oberg VII ascended to the throne. This happened in the Karsuk province in the north of the Grimoires region. The Roman and Freya did not know much about it, but Brando was very clear about it. He didn't want to say that his plan was to help the Romans save his aunt. Of course, if he had the chance, he would try his best to save as many people as possible. But as for reporting to Fortress Reedon, he didn't even think of himself as a savior. Brando never thought of himself as a savior. It was better to expect pigs to fly than to expect the nobles to understand human language. In the old Erewhon era, the players in the game had clashed with the arrogant nobles more than once. Even during the December coup, some players had directly participated. Brando never had a good impression of these guys. But when he thought about it again, Freya might not have the same opinion as him. He couldn't help but look at her again. This country girl who held her sword and stared blankly at Fortress Reden still trusted this country. There was nothing wrong with that, but he was worried that she might act rashly at a crucial moment. But even if he told the truth, Freya might not believe him, and it would only cause conflict between the two of them. Brando didn't want to argue. He thought for a while and suddenly had an idea. Of course, the necessary preparations still needed to be made. He pretended to think for a while and replied, "I thought about it. It seems like we don't have much choice. After all, we are Erwin's people, and we can't completely avoid the risks. But," he paused for a while, "we still need to be fully prepared." Roman and Freya could only agree with Brando's righteous words. Even the heroic ponytailed girl couldn't help but soften her attitude. She looked at Brando with a gentle gaze, and suddenly felt that this guy wasn't as shameless as she thought. But only a genius would know that Brando was secretly relieved after he finished speaking. He was surprised to find that he seemed to have found a balance between Brando and himself. He was never a person who stuck to the rules, but recently, it felt like there was a large hand pushing him forward mechanically, making him a little breathless. But as his strength gradually grew, and his soul was baptized in the dream of the golden demonic tree, the feeling of the past finally returned to him. This made him feel that he was able to deal with the problem easily again. His way of thinking even included some of Brando's quickness. This feeling was great. He took out the ebony gargoyle statue, which still had a small crack on it. He turned his head and said, "You also need to be prepared. Freya, turn your ring around, the fire agate in the middle is too conspicuous. Little Roman, you need to keep the dagger close to your body, those lazy guards won't search too carefully. Do I have to turn my ring around too?" "No need, no one will look at that broken ring of yours. Brando, those people are the city's guards. Why does it seem like you don't trust them?" Freya couldn't help but ask. "It's not that I don't trust them, but I never trusted them. You'll know when the time comes, just do as I say for now." Freya had never entered the city, but she more or less felt that he was making a mountain out of a molehill. But at this moment, Brando was the authority, so she could only choose to believe. As Brando spoke, he took out bits and pieces from his body. The main thing was that he didn't have time to identify some of the small items found on the noble's body. He found that the pipe was just an ordinary item, so he threw it away. As for the dark gray stone piece, he didn't even recognize it. This was actually not strange, as there were thousands of production materials, so it was normal that Brando didn't recognize one of the minerals. The last glass bead was a little interesting. Brando found that it was actually a container after a piece of soul crystal was consumed. In layman's terms, it was a storage item. The spell inside should be 10 feet of silence, which was a very suitable spell to avoid the nest of some monsters when adventuring in the wild. But what made Brando embarrassed was that as a warrior, he didn't have the ability to activate storage items. He hesitated for a moment before keeping these things and the cards with him, so as to prevent those greedy guards from touching them. He looked up at the sky, and it was still early. The three of them came down from the east side of Mount Findeck, and along the way, they began to see scattered buildings. They were mainly farmsteads and isolated houses of mercenaries in the wilderness at night. The farmsteads were scattered on both sides of the Pine River. There were also a few goose houses in the wilderness. These goose houses were only patronized by passing adventurers and those who were engaged in illicit business. Of course, apart from the players, most of the adventurers weren't clean themselves. Moreover, most of the NPCs treated the players as grave robbers. They walked in the wilderness for about an hour, and the towering walls of Fortress Reden suddenly appeared in front of them in the night sky. There were braziers on the suspension bridge under the tower, and the light from the flames could be seen tens of meters away. Brando had Freya and Roman slow down, and then slowly walked out of the darkness at the edge of the flames. The guards on the tower were talking to each other, and there was even a faint snoring sound. Brando was very sensitive to these sounds, and he frowned, guessing that there were about 7 to 8 people on the tower. When the 3 of them appeared, the chatter stopped. "Who are you people?" They remained alert for a short while, and then a soldier with a pointed helmet popped his head out from the tower and shouted. Roman looked up and squinted his eyes, and saw that there was a black pine symbol on the helmet. Brando said that the black pine symbol meant that they were from the local army. The white maned soldiers should have a wolf feather symbol, as expected. Brando knew everything, she thought. 1 man, 2 women. "We came from the forest, master, and we saw something strange. My wife and I were frightened, and wanted to go into the city to hide." Brando raised his hand and shouted. Freya was embarrassed and angry at the same time. 1 man and 2 women, how vulgar. When she heard Brando say that they were his wives, she couldn't help but secretly poke Brando's back with her sword sheath. This bastard must have done it on purpose, she thought. Roman didn't mind. She probably thought that being Brando's wife wasn't bad, and Brando would protect her anyway, right? Brando couldn't say anything, and he could only say that to make the guards lower their guard. As for the explanation, he, Freya and Roman looked different, and they couldn't say that they were siblings, and the guards weren't idiots. "Did you bring any weapons?" the guard asked again. Freya nervously held her sword when she heard that. But Brando didn't panic, and raised his voice. "How would we dare to walk in the forest without weapons, and I used to be a militia, master." The tower became quiet, and only a long snoring sound could be heard. After a while, a basket was put down, and the guard shouted, "Put your weapons in the basket. Then we will bring you up one by one." Brando nodded to Freya and let them do as they were told. Although his Thorn of Light was exquisite, no one could tell that it was a magic sword as long as he didn't chant it. After all, elven swords were still passed down in the human world. After the weapons were handed over, the guard sent down a basket for them to go up one by one. Brando was afraid that Roman and Freya would be at a disadvantage, so he took the initiative to go up first. Freya was the second to let Roman go first, and she was the last to be pulled up. But when she sat in the basket and was pulled up to the tower, she saw Brando and Roman in a state of swords, and 2 guards were walking towards her with their swords drawn. "What's going on?" Freya was stunned and asked in surprise. She subconsciously looked at Brando, but she didn't expect him to look away and not answer her question. The ponytailed girl panicked. She always treated Brando as the backbone of the team, but now it seemed like the decision was in her hands. What should she do? Should she let these people hold her hostage? Are these people doing things according to the norm? Brando, hurry up and answer me. What are you thinking, damn it? Capture them all, these people are Madara's scouts. But at this time, Freya suddenly heard someone in the corner give an order. She was shocked and turned around to ask, "You know that Madara's army is invading?" Brando's face was terrible, although Freya had grown up. She was still a little girl who hadn't seen the world, and a few words were enough to make her panic. She might have thought that there was nothing wrong with what she said, but she didn't know that the guards of Fortress Reden were most afraid of encountering people from Butchie. These people wanted to suppress the news in the city, so that they could shirk their responsibilities in the future. Brando knew very well that they thought that with Fortress Reden's high walls, they could sit back and relax, but they didn't know that the war was going in an unpredictable direction. Wait a minute, we're not scouts. Freya couldn't help but defend herself. We're Butchie's militia, we have Butchie's guard badge. But the voice didn't care about her and shouted, "Capture her, what are you hesitating for?" The person who spoke walked out from the darkness. He was wearing a black chainmail, and the feathers on his helmet showed that he was the leader of this group. But this wretched middle-aged man was looking at Freya with a perverted gaze, thinking that he had picked up a good one this time. Of course he believed that Freya was telling the truth, the militia badge was still on her. But he didn't think that a poor village like Butchie would have such an outstanding woman. He rubbed his chin. P.S. Please count votes, please support me. Chapter 53. Seeing how flustered Freya was, Brando guessed that she probably had some understanding of the Fortress Rieden's troops. But it was not enough, he wanted her to know more. Only reality could let Freya understand the situation they were in. Of course, Brando did not want to destroy her last bit of hope in this country, but sometimes, doing things could not be done with passion. Rushing around recklessly would only lead to injuries. Brando was never a rash person, and he hoped that Freya would learn to act calmly. Of course, he would protect them when necessary, but the bottom line was that he could not let these people hurt Freya and the Roman. He wanted to see how Freya was going to deal with this crisis, but he saw her gaze in the distance. He was startled and followed her gaze. He realized that she was looking at the east side of Fortress Rieden's barracks. He saw a group of people with different heights surrounding a tall middle-aged man. Behind them was a group of white main light infantry. They seemed to be nobles. Brando suddenly felt that it was interesting. He did not expect his luck to be so good. It was as if someone had sent him a pillow when he wanted to sleep. But Freya's reaction was quick, and she immediately noticed those important figures. He roughly understood Freya's thoughts, and nodded his head to himself. From a normal person's point of view, Freya's reaction was correct. Of course, Brando only wanted to see how she was going to break her head and bleed. If he said that, it would be unfair to the future goddess of war, but Brando knew that he was doing it for her sake, and that was enough. Furthermore, this was Freya's own choice. He turned around and saw two guards drawing their swords towards Freya. They did not expect that the girl would dare to resist when their two companions had already surrendered. She was also so decisive. The moment she jumped into the tower, she rushed towards the weapons rack. The two guards were shocked and quickly drew their swords to block her. But Freya suddenly turned around and grabbed one of the guards' wrist with her right hand. She leaned to the side and used her left hand to chop the guard's armpit. From snatching the sword to subduing the guard, the entire process was done in a single breath. In the blink of an eye, the guard screamed and fell to the ground. The ponytailed girl snatched the sword and clashed with the other guard. With 3 consecutive slashes, she relied on the strength she had gained from the battle with the golden demonic tree to force the guard to retreat 5 steps until he reached the wall. Then, she turned her sword around and knocked the unlucky guard on the head, causing him to bleed and fall to the ground. Then, she turned around, and the aura on her body actually scared the remaining 4 guards and their captain into taking a step back. Freya could not help but feel bitter. The Fortress Rieden's army that she had always relied on was only at this level. She thought that all of them were as strong as Brendel, or maybe a little weaker, but at least they should not be too far off. But Brendel secretly praised her for her beauty. The local guards were only at the level of veterans, but Freya's skills were already enough to enter the guards. She was also calm and collected, which was even more commendable. But when he looked at the white main light infantry, he thought that if Freya thought that the kingdom's army was also this strong, she would be in for a big loss. But what he needed to do now was not to delay the future goddess of war's judgment. So he suddenly grabbed the 2 guards beside him and threw them out before they could react. Then he turned around and grabbed his elven sword. With a swing of his sword, the 2 guards who were holding on to the Roman lost their swords. "What do you plan to do?" He did not care about the guards who were lying on the ground and grabbed the Roman's hand and ran over. Freya glared at him and then looked towards the camp. Her meaning was clear. "Go over there. That's good too." As the saying goes, the king of hell is easy to deal with, but the little demons are hard to deal with. Brando laughed. "What does that mean?" the Roman asked curiously. She rubbed her wrist. Those people had used too much strength just now, so much so that her hands were sore from grabbing. What I mean is, let's see what those big shots have to say. Freya felt that there was more to this guy's words, but she did not have time to refute him. She looked at the guard captain who was paralyzed on the ground with disgust, and then she took the lead and jumped out of the tower. Brando, Freya seems to be angry. It's okay, just follow me. Romain looked at him curiously. The Golden Apple Lord, Escabar, was in a good mood today, if it wasn't for the scene in front of him. When he saw this young girl suddenly rushing in front of him, he was startled for a moment. The guards behind him swarmed forward and surrounded her. Escabar also saw that there were two people in the encirclement, and they were dressed like country bumpkins. He was stunned for a moment, and then anger rose in his chest. What are these bastards doing? How could they let 3 dirty country bumpkins barge in here? Who is the guard captain tonight? I'm going to make him go back and eat himself. Escobar's face turned green and white, and he was about to explode. But he felt someone poke him with a cane from behind. He looked back and saw the disgusting industrialist, the owner of the workshop, Sir Burnley's ugly face. To be honest, he did not want to say anything more to this calculative fatty who reeked of money. Fortunately, the Lord's mind was clear enough to understand that at least they were on the same side. He followed his gaze and was shocked when he saw Freya's epaulette. Butchie's militia, didn't they say that Madara's army had reached the Belder Forest? How did they get here? He could not help but glance at a place a little further behind, hoping that the important people there did not notice the commotion here. Then he held his sword and shouted at the guards, "What are you doing here? Take the assassins away." Assassins? Freya was about to speak, but she was shocked by the words. She opened her eyes wide and wanted to argue, but she realized that the guards around her had drawn their swords. The clear sound of metal vibrating was as if it was going to pierce her heart. What's going on here? It was at this moment that a quiet and solemn voice interrupted, causing everyone to subconsciously move aside. After the crowd separated, a middle-aged man with deep-set eyes, a high-nosed bridge, and a gloomy face appeared. He held a golden cane and looked at everyone with a cold gaze. Escabar took a deep breath and cursed in his heart. Damn it, he still attracted this trouble. His mind raced, but his expression remained unchanged as he replied, "A few civilians broke in. They might be assassins." Civilians? The middle-aged man frowned. "Sir, we are not assassins. We are Butchie's militia," Freya hurriedly explained. "We are here to report that Butchie is under Ma." The middle-aged man showed a disgusted expression and interrupted, "What's your name?" "Fu, Freya." Freya was stunned. She felt that the man's cold gaze was like being stared at by a poisonous snake, and she could not help but lower her head. "What about you?" he asked the Roman on the other side. "My name is Roman, uncle." The future merchant girl blinked and replied. Some people in the crowd could not help but laugh, but they quickly held it back. This time, the middle-aged man's expression did not change, and he waved his hand. "Take them away, we will talk after we interrogate them." "Sir, we..." Freya was shocked and quickly raised her head to explain. But the middle-aged man did not listen to their explanation, and instead ordered the guards to surround the 3 of them. The middle-aged man looked at them coldly and said, "Wait." As if his words had a great effect, everyone subconsciously stopped what they were doing and looked at him. "Let me see the sword in that person's hand." He pointed at Brando with his cane. "Sword." Everyone was stunned, and then they noticed the shape of the sword in Brando's hand. It was an elven sword. Elven swords were known for their beauty, and were usually circulated in the upper circle as works of art. Escabar could not help but curse again, thinking that this ruthless man had sharp eyes. He had set his eyes on the 2 women and the sword. What made him uncomfortable was that the other party's identity and position were much higher than his. Even if he said that he wanted it, he could only obediently give it to him. He could not afford to offend the power behind the other party. He waved his hand, and the guards immediately understood and pointed their swords at Brando. Brando turned around to look at Freya, and saw that the girl's face was blank and lost. He knew that it was about time, but he still had to remain calm. He shrugged and obediently handed over the sword. At least this kid knows what's good for him. This action made Escapades think to himself. A guard jogged over with the sword and handed it over to the middle-aged man with both hands. The middle-aged man coldly picked up the sword, flipped it over, and read the words on it, Sonston, Donamur, Elven, the sword is born from the light, and all enemies tremble in fear. He raised the sword, and the elven sword in his hand shone brightly. Everyone around could not help but gasp. A magic sword. These nobles could not help but look at Brando and the others, and they were even more convinced that the three of them were assassins. After all, which militia would carry a magic weapon with them? No one would believe it. However, the middle-aged man looked at the glowing leaf-shaped sword in his hand, and for the first time, a smile appeared on his face. He looked at the industrialist beside him and asked, "Sir Barian is rich and knowledgeable. Can you tell me the origin of this sword? I've seen a few elven weapons, but how could I compare to what you've seen in that circle, my lord?" The nobleman with the ball of mutton fat hurriedly rolled his body and said fawningly. The middle-aged man smiled coldly and replied, "Then for the sake of this sword, I'll let them have an easy time tonight. Tomorrow, I'll personally interrogate these assassins. As for the two ladies, take good care of them. You better tell your captain, grandson, exactly what I said. Don't think that I don't know about their dirty." His words became colder and colder, and finally, the guard in front of him kept quiet out of fear. However, the others revealed a meaningful smile. The more obvious this man's attitude was, the more advantageous it was for them. It was just two ladies and a sword. Compared to their own interests, they were more concerned about the latter. Freya's face was flushed with anger, and she could not help but take a deep breath. She gritted her teeth and clenched her fists. For a moment, Brando was afraid that she would act rashly without considering the consequences. Fortunately, the Valkyrie was much calmer than when he first met her. He raised his head and looked at the middle-aged man, and then looked at the shining thorn of light in his hand. He frowned. Who was this man? He seemed to have a high status. It was a pity that he did not know every detail of history, but his reaction was interesting. However, he was not too nervous. The best part was yet to come. When they were taken away by the guards, Brando clearly heard the middle-aged man ask, "All right, back to the main topic. Mr. Escapades, when do you plan to let me out of the city?" The middle-aged man's voice was cold and filled with a hint of sarcasm. "Count Escapades, it's a critical time now. Madara has already entered Fort Vermeer. Butchie's flanks might be affected at any time. The wilderness is too dangerous, especially since you're a close subject of His Majesty. What reason do we have to let you take the risk?" The middle-aged man smiled and did not continue the conversation. "P.S. 3 Rivers on Amber, there's a poll. I hope everyone will vote for it. Also, for those who have free votes, please vote for the work, Amber. The author does not need to vote." Chapter 54. After the guard captain sent them here, he coldly threatened them and left, making Freya grit her teeth in anger. This should be the second level of the dungeon. There are 32 cells here, and there are 4 wardens. They are all light infantry from the 104th Swordsman Regiment of the White Mane Army. Brendel thought to himself as he sat alone in the darkness. This should be the second level of the dungeon. There are 32 cells here, and there are 4 wardens. They are all light infantry from the 104th Swordsman Regiment. In the past, who didn't have a PK red name in the game? This wasn't the first time he visited Fortress Reden's prison, but they were all locked up in the third floor. In the eyes of the NPCs, the players were a bunch of lawless people. Thinking about this, Brando couldn't help but laugh. He took out the ebony gargoyle statue and touched it. The crack on it was almost undetectable. Then he turned around and asked in the dark, "Freya, Roman, how are you? Are you okay? Brando, how long will we be locked up?" Romain's voice sounded uneasy. Brando thought to himself, so you also have times when you're afraid. The two girls were locked up in the opposite cell. Although it was dark, at least they were safe. Just as he wanted to say something to comfort her, he heard a bang from the darkness. Damn it! Those despicable bastards, all our hard work is not for these people. Freya slammed her fist on the wooden fence, gritting her teeth in anger. You inside, what are you doing? Do you want to be whipped? The jailer's fierce voice sounded from outside. Even though Freya was so angry that she wanted to rush out and beat up every single one of them, but she understood the situation she was in. She took a deep breath and calmed herself down. Brando, what do we do? She asked softly. Another voice immediately interrupted, this is the dark prison, right? Auntie said that some people are locked up their whole lives and never see the light of day. Brando, will we be the same? Shut your crow's beak, Romain. Freya replied in Brendel's place, annoyed. He smiled, do you still have hope for those people? I hope they all die. Freya gritted her teeth. But without their help, Fortress Reden will be in danger. Brando walked to the door and replied softly. Freya was silent. At least I tried my best. She replied, my power is not limitless, I can only do this much for Butchie. Brando felt relieved. It seems that the night was worth it. In fact, he noticed that after the dream at the Golden Tree, Freya quickly. It was because of this that his Valkyrie training plan could be carried out, and he wanted Freya to be his assistant. An S-rank general in the game. This was a deal that would never be a loss. It's good that you think that way. He replied. Brando, do you have any ideas? Yes, you guys step back. Since Brando dared to come in, he must have a way to get out. The reason why he was so fearless was because he knew that the next night was going to be a nightmare. The funny thing was that the nobles of Fortress Reden didn't know about it. Freya had given these people a final chance, but they had locked her up here with a groundless accusation. Was this what they meant by seeking their own destruction? Wait, Brando, what are you doing? Don't do anything rash, this is the prison. Although Freya said that she wanted the nobles to die, she still thought of herself as Erwin's people. If she went out like that, wouldn't it be a rebellion? I know what I'm doing. What do you mean what you're doing? Ah, Roman, talk to him. Freya couldn't help but lower her voice. On one hand, she hoped that the guards outside would come in and stop Brando's crazy actions, but on the other hand, she was worried that the people outside would notice what was going on inside. Brando, I want to go out too. Romain replied. Shut up, I didn't ask you to persuade me like that. Freya wanted to cry. Did these two people not understand the situation they were in? Breaking out of the prison would result in a death sentence. When she thought that her two best companions might become wanted criminals, she couldn't help but feel a little helpless. Brando took out the Highland Squire card and threw it on the ground. The water EP that the Sacred Tree's secret ground produced this week was immediately paid out. After a cloud of smoke, a young man wearing a long robe and carrying a large bundle of scrolls walked out. Brando already knew that before there was an elemental pool. The EP produced by the card would be paid out that week and would be lost. In other words, it couldn't be saved, but it could still be used within this week. My name is the Shire, Lord. I'm happy to serve you. The young man looked at him and bowed deeply. "You're a Highland mage?" Brando asked. "Apprentice," the young man added seriously. Brando found that he could inspect the other party's attributes. Highland Wizard Apprentice with 16 HP, 8 MP, and 2 spells. Basic Composition, 2 MP, and Magic Arrow, 1 MP. Knowledge System, Basic Magic, Composition Magic, Basic Knowledge, Local and Geographical Knowledge, and Level 1 Heraldry. You learned Law Magic. That's right. A law wizard was a type of wizard in a broad sense, dedicated to researching the power of the law. Their magic was a type of magic that manipulated the threads connecting the material world and the law world, using the energy of the gems to transform and materialize their power. There were 9 schools of wizards in the Amber Sword: law magic, elemental magic, string magic, witchcraft, runic magic, holy words, astrology, psychic magic, and magic circle. In fact, each of these 9 schools represented a different set of magic systems, but ordinary people often couldn't tell the difference between them, so they were collectively called wizards. But this saying was not without reason, because after all, magic had one thing in common, and that was mystery. "Brando, who's talking to you?" Freya suddenly stopped and asked. "Yes, my attendant," Brando replied. "Attendant?" The girl was stunned. Brando took out the soul crystal that contained the 10 feet silent spell and threw it to the young man. "Activate it." Although warriors couldn't use storage items, wizard apprentices could. The Shire took the crystal bead and injected 1 MP into it. The surface of the soul crystal glowed faintly, and the surroundings became silent. It was as if an invisible monster suddenly appeared in the darkness and swallowed all sound. Freya was also shocked. She suddenly found that she couldn't make a sound. Of course, she didn't know that this was Brando's masterpiece, and for a moment, her heart was pounding. After all, most ordinary people would react this way when faced with a mysterious spell. The Shire nodded to his lord. Brando turned around and took the opportunity to punch the thick wooden bars of the dungeon. After the battle with the golden demonic tree, Brando's hands were unprecedentedly rich. 965 EXP was enough for him to level up the mercenaries to level 8, and the militia to level 6. After leveling up to level 15, his strength had reached 4 ounces. And after the power burst, it exceeded 10 ounces. When he punched the wooden bars, the sturdy pillars should have broken from the middle, and then suddenly flew out and hit the bars on Freya's side with a loud bang. But within the range of the silent spell, one could only see the wood silently shattering, wood chips flying everywhere. 2 pieces of wood flew over and hit the other side, quietly bouncing off, and bouncing twice when they fell. Brando walked out of the gap that was about the width of a person, and then the Shire. He grabbed the iron chain on the opposite side of the bars, and with a casual tug, it deformed and then broke into pieces. He opened the door again, and the duration of the silent spell had just ended. "What, do you want to stay a little longer?" Brando stood at the door of the cell, looking at the 2 surprised girls, and asked with a smile. You came out just like that." Freya couldn't believe what she had just seen. This was too lawless. Looking at Brando's skillful movements, it seemed like this wasn't the first time he had done something like this. Brando laughed. Those nobles really treated him like a nameless militia. What a joke. In the game, he had escaped from prison at least 80, if not 100 times. Not to mention a small place like Fortress Reedon, even the port city of Ampere Seal's Ironthorn stronghold had a successful escape. Players had always ignored the rules of NPCs, and in the past, there was a strong player who escaped from the capital prison of Gruus, and it caused a sensation on the forums. He thought that if he stayed here until tomorrow morning, wouldn't he be letting down his former identity as a player? And who is he? Freya only just noticed that there was another person beside Brando. Respected ladies, I am the Lord Squire. The Shire lowered his head and bowed to the two girls. Squire. Lord. Roman and Freya almost couldn't control their voices. What was going on? Could it be that the dungeon is some kind of mysterious space? Why did he suddenly become a lord after staying there for a while, and even have a follower? Freya couldn't help but pat her face to make sure she wasn't dreaming. She couldn't help but think that if the young man who lived alone in the old mansion and disappeared for a few months was a lord, then wouldn't she be a goddess of war? Moreover, how did you come here? She couldn't help but ask. As you can see, I am a mage. The Shire replied calmly. This made Brando praise him. This guy's ability to bullshit was almost on par with his own. A wizard's apprentice. Freya sucked in a cold breath. You are a Highland Knight, Brando, so you are a Danian. She looked at Brando in disbelief. In this world, there was only one kind of mage that would appear as a squire of a knight. The Highland Knights of Karsuk had allied with the wizards for 300 years, forming the strongest military force in Erewhon, the White Knight Regiment. The Highland Knights and their mage squires were already well-known legends in Erewhon. At this moment, Freya had already determined that Brando was a noble young man born in a Highland Knight family. No wonder he is so powerful, no wonder he can be so calm, so he is a knight. She suddenly lowered her head, thinking that this hateful guy was obviously a noble, but why did he approach her in Roman? They were just two small commoners. Yes, he must be up to no good. She immediately put the blame on Brando for some of the bad habits of nobles that she heard from Aunt Sil, and then quietly shrank back. Brando obviously did not expect their future goddess of war to be so good at thinking. He thought she was too shocked to accept the fact. Actually, he had no choice, since they thought it was easier to accept, and it also saved him the trouble of explaining. He could not help but shake his head and look at the Shire. Reality was so helpless. Very well, ladies. It's almost time, come out quickly. Brando looked at the Roman hiding in the dark, looking at him with bright eyes full of curiosity. He could not help but shake his head and said, You don't really plan to stay in there until dawn, do you? Brando, are you really a knight? The Roman suddenly asked. No, I am Brando. He replied. Then I will come out. Please, P.S. I will explode, don't worry, please vote. Chapter 55. When the three of them came out of the cell, they saw Brando easily taking care of the three patrolling guards. The whole process was done silently and skillfully. Freya suspected that Brando had undergone special training in the past, but why would a Highland Knight need such training? The dungeon under the barracks did not have many prisoners, and the security was very lax. Fortress Reedon had a dungeon that was used to lock up criminals, but the dungeon here was mainly used to lock up deserters and robbers. However, the military would usually execute these people on the spot, so the dungeon had not been used many times since it was built, and the wardens were only there to deal with it. However, the dungeon in the game was used to lock up players, and it was completely different from the dungeon here. It was overcrowded. If the White Mane Army had any other enemies in the game other than Madara, it would definitely be this dungeon. After taking care of the patrolling guards, the four of them went to the center of the dungeon. The guard who was in charge of the keys was shocked when he saw the four of them coming out from the darkness, and subconsciously pulled out his sword from the wall. However, Brando immediately raised his protective gloves and blocked the guard's sword with a layer of blue light. The blue light was about the size of a soccer ball, and there seemed to be a force pushing the sharp sword away. The White Mane Light Infantry was shocked, and the sword in his hand was taken away by Brando. Then, the young man pushed him away, causing him to hit the wall, and he fainted with a groan. But to Brendel, they were just ordinary soldiers. He had the ability to kill them, but he did not kill them. He only knocked them out with one move. Freya saw that he had defeated the last enemy and could not help but say, "You are so powerful, Brando. If it wasn't for this trip, I would still be at the bottom of a well." "You are not bad, don't belittle yourself. White Swordsman is at the middle of the pack, you are more than qualified to enter the garrison." Brando found the key to the next floor from the guard and replied. "Swordsman by." The Shire explained, for a swordsman, iron, silver, and gold ranks correspond to the titles of a knight squire, official knight, and superior knight. As for an iron swordsman, Erwin calls them knights reserve. If a nobleman has the slightest potential, he or she will be sent to a great noble family to become a squire. According to tradition, a swordsman of this rank has the right to not take off his hat when he sees a squire or a lord. However, this tradition was almost abandoned half a century ago. Below black iron swordsman, there was no position. Generally speaking, the strength of your garrison and militia are all at this stage, but there are some differences. I see. Freya was enlightened. Previously, her vision was still constrained by the number 1 swordsman in the militia, but now it was broadened. But Seal wasn't done yet. He seemed to have seen through his lord's intention to nurture this girl, so he continued, "A black iron swordsman represents the first level of strength, 3 to 20 OZ, a silver swordsman represents the second level of strength, 20 to 100 OZ, and a gold swordsman represents the third level of strength, 100 to 500 OZ. We wizards correspond to intermediate wizards, first circle wizards, and second circle wizards. Priests and other professions also have similar divisions. In fact, this division isn't based on a country or a family, but is strictly set by the Holy Cathedral of Fire." Freya and Roman could not help but blink. They did not know that there was so much logic behind this. However, these things weren't rare knowledge among the commoners, it was just that Butchie was too secluded. You must know that in those powerful empires, such as Groose and Bonko, the soldiers of the standing army are at least black iron, and the captains are almost all silver swordsmen. But in Erewhon, even the frontline soldiers of the border army are not at the level of black iron swordsmen, and even the captains of the night are only at the level of black iron. The Shire pointed out. "The Shire, if word of this gets out, we will be beheaded." "My lord, you are not afraid of being beheaded, so I, as a squire, am naturally not afraid." The young man cleverly replied, and he continued, "My lord should be at the level of black iron swordsman, which is very rare for my lord's age. The Shire is very honored to be able to follow such an outstanding person." Brando thought to himself, not to mention the Reverend and the Chosen One, even those who were born with the talent of a knight were nothing. If his achievement was combined with the fact that he completed it in a few days, it would seem strange, but the Shire did not know this. However, it was still quite satisfying to have someone flatter him, and he was too lazy to expose them. Anyway, Roman and Freya's slightly surprised gazes made him feel quite proud, right? The Shire looked at the unconscious soldier on the ground, and asked in a low voice, "There seem to be other prisoners in the 5th, 17th, and 22nd cells. Should we release them to help us escape, my lord? If it's a military camp outside, the more people there are, the higher the chance of success." Freya immediately glared at this guy. What kind of rotten idea was this? Didn't Brando say that the prisoners here were those who had committed the most heinous crimes? There's no need for that. Too many people will only affect my plans. Brendel replied confidently. "As you wish." Brando turned his head again. "Roman, do you know where your aunt is?" Roman shook his head. "I don't know, but I heard that she will be staying at a cousin's house." "Where does that cousin live?" "I know, in the Ponoan market." "I heard from my aunt that the person seems to be a distant relative of Roman's aunt, a small woolen merchant called Hood." Freya replied. Brando looked at Roman. "Your family has a merchant's tradition." The merchant girl smiled sweetly in return. Since they had determined the place to go, the next step was easy. The first floor of the dungeon under the military camp was smaller, and there was only one warden. Brando confirmed that the 4 wardens on the next floor were temporarily added because of them. After dealing with this floor, they continued to go up and arrived at the interior of the military camp. Brando was very familiar with this place. First, he took Freya's half-plate of the Wind Empress from the temporary storage, then he looted a sword from each of the prisoners and equipped them. It was a pity that there was no experience in knocking out the soldiers, otherwise Brando wouldn't mind waking them up and knocking them out a few more times. The Shire had suggested more than once to stir up the prisoners so that they could escape during the riot. The reason was simple: it would be easy for them to deal with 1 or 2 white main light infantry. But once they reached the courtyard outside, it would be difficult for the 4 of them to kill their way out. But Brando vetoed the idea. While they were talking, they had already sneaked into the top floor of the military camp. Brando opened the wooden door on the top floor of the tower and walked out. Outside was an open-air walkway with parapets on both sides for temporary defense. Brando didn't need to look to know that it was a tributary of the Song River in the city. From here, he could see about 1/5 of the city. But he wasn't here to look at the scenery. Along the way, they had knocked out 7 of the guards. According to the White Mane Army's training, they would realize that something was amiss in about 10 minutes. Brando looked up at the sky. The moon was beautiful tonight, and even the thick clouds couldn't hide the silver disk in the night sky. "What are you doing, Brando?" Freya couldn't help but poke him from behind. She couldn't help but think that this guy didn't break out of prison just to see the moon. Although it was unlikely, but according to this guy's misdeeds, it wasn't impossible. She then looked at the Shire. The young man was also looking at the sky with his hands behind his back, not saying a word. The master and servant had a tacit understanding. "The moon is beautiful tonight," Brando casually replied. "Youth." Freya was so angry that she gritted her teeth. She really wanted to punch this guy's face and see if he could still smile. "My aunt said that the moon's name is Luca. Luca was born because of Elaine. Elaine was Alice's sister, a twin goddess. Because of the moon, there are mysteries in this world." Roman looked up at the moon and said, "Your aunt knows a lot," the Shire replied. "This is a secret passed down among the wizards in this world. There is a book called The Epic of Darkness, and it describes the events that happened in the past." "You mean that Roman's aunt is a wizard?" Freya was stunned. "Not necessarily, she is related to magic. Some of the witches in the countryside also know about this," the Shire replied. The girl with a long ponytail couldn't help but look at Roman, who was staring at the moon as if he didn't hear these words. But Freya thought that Aunt Jenny was indeed a bit mysterious. She often brought back strange things from the outside. The villagers all said that she was a witch and didn't have much contact with her family. But as Brendel listened to the 3 of them, a strange thought appeared in his mind. That's right. 16. The Tower. The lost moon took away the light. He was stunned for a moment, thinking that he was hallucinating. He quickly shook his head, but he couldn't help but think of the dream he had when he was unconscious that night. In a quiet and dark environment, everything in the dream seemed bizarre and variegated. However, there was only a black moon, a dark lake, and a tall tower that stood quietly in the middle of it all throughout the dream. After that, he met Freya. But just as he thought of this, he heard the merchant girl staring at the moon and saying, "Something is coming, Brando." The rest of the 3 people raised their heads. After waiting for about 20 seconds, everyone present heard the low sound of flapping wings from the sky. But Freya was confused and uneasy, while Brando and the Shire didn't panic, especially Brando. He raised his head. The next moment, the gargoyle opened its wings and jumped out from the clouds under the moonlight. The winged stone demon in the bright moonlight, above the clouds, formed a mysterious composition in the eyes of the 3 people. "Brando, that's your gargoyle," Roman recognized it immediately. Yes, are you afraid of heights? Romaine quickly shook her head. What do you want, Brando? Freya thought of something and her face turned pale. When the Golden Apple Lord barged into Burnley's house with a gloomy face, the honorary aristocrat, who claimed to be a big workshop owner and an industrialist, was looking at an exquisite brass armor with a magnifying glass. After all, an armor of the Year of Glory style was priceless in the hands of any collector. Burnley slowly kept the magnifying glass in his hand and looked at his companion. He teased, "What's wrong? Did that guy bring people out of the city?" "It's not that serious, it's just that the prisoners escaped tonight." Escobar couldn't help but get angry when he mentioned this. Actually, he wasn't angry about this, he was angry about the madman who came to his house and shouted at him. "That's just a small matter, how did they escape?" "That's not what I'm angry about." The Golden Apple Lord shook his head and took a deep breath. "What I'm angry about is that the tiger Luke Besson of the White Mane Army came to me and said that I locked up a descendant of a Highland Knight in his dungeon and that I was trying to cause trouble for him." "A Highland Knight?" Burnley was stunned. "Yes, he said that one of the 3 prisoners was a Highland Knight. Also, his mage squire was with him." "Oh my God, he actually came to me to ask for that person. He said that I can't touch that person and that he must get him into his group." The Golden Apple Lord was furious at the mention of this. "And the result?" The result is that I have to bring people to settle this matter. It's the middle of the night, that guy is too much." He replied in a bad mood. "Don't be impulsive, let Grantham handle this matter. I'll get some people from my private army to help you." Burnley replied with a smile. The Golden Apple Lord looked at him gratefully. For the first time, he didn't feel that the round face was so annoying. But he thought for a while and reminded, "Actually, I'm here for another matter. I heard that you recently shipped a batch of armor into the city. You have to be careful. Although it's not a big deal to cultivate your own forces, you have to be careful not to let others use it against you." He couldn't help but look into the house. "It's just a hobby." The businessman replied with a smile. "P.S. Strange, why do I feel like my results are so bad?" Chapter 56. Brando and his squire dismounted from the gargoyle and saw Roman and Freya's pale face in the alley, especially the latter who was glaring at him hatefully. But he found it funny that the goddess of war was afraid of heights. When he thought of her pale face in the sky, she was no different from the girls in his previous team. "All right, I'll explain the current situation." Brando was afraid that Freya would settle the score with him, so he spoke first. Freya saw through his trick and lightly snorted. She turned her head away, too lazy to argue with him. "We have already delivered the news, whether they accept it or not is up to the nobles. What we need to do now is to find Roman's aunt and escape from Fortress Reedon before Madara attacks. But that won't be easy." Brando waved his hand and had the gargoyle fly up to the roof to observe the surroundings. He had been experimenting with talisman incantation since night fell, and finally found one that he could use. But he was still lacking an offensive incantation. "Freya and Roman are registered militia, so your relatives in Fortress Reedon must have a record. If we contact Roman's distant relative, we might run the risk of being discovered, especially when we don't know if the other party is reliable. Then won't Aunt Jenny be in danger?" Freya turned her head and asked. Brando glanced at Roman, the latter didn't say a word and was playing with his clothes. "Overall, the enemy has some time to react, but if we move like a swarm of bees, the chances of failure will be higher. To save time, we need to split into 3 groups and confirm what each of us should do." He took a deep breath and subconsciously brought out the demeanor of a team leader in the game. But in the real world, Brando couldn't help but feel a little nervous when he was in charge of other people's lives. His gaze paused on the 3 of them, and he pointed out, "Freya, contact Roman's relatives. Me? Freya pointed at herself in surprise. Yes. But I only know that he lives in Ponyo Market. I don't even know the exact number. Besides, I don't even know where Ponyo and Market is. The ponytailed girl looked troubled. You can ask. The Pono and Market is nearby. There's a bar called Red Copper Dragon Story Club after you walk out of this alley. You can go there and ask for information. Brando suddenly smiled. But be careful. The mercenaries in the bar have dirty hands and feet. Don't get taken advantage of. Freya's face flushed red, and she glared at him fiercely. You. Shameless. The Shire chuckled at the side, thinking that his lord was quite interesting. It was rare for nobles to visit such a vulgar place like a bar, but it seemed like he was very familiar with the kingdom's affairs. Wizards always liked to hang out with smart people, especially those who were knowledgeable. Of course, this young man was no exception. After you find that woolen merchant called Hood, don't reveal your identity. Give him a time and ask him to meet us at the bar. You have to pay attention to his reaction and you will know if he is reliable. If you find traces of the army, don't worry. Before they know our relationship, they will not act rashly and alert the enemy. They will also want to have a chance to catch us all in one fell swoop. Freya thought for a while, as if to confirm if she could do it, and then nodded. What about me, Brando? Roman blinked and asked. Roman, help us contact a carriage and wait for us at the north gate. There are only 2 hostels in Fortress Reden, so they might be monitored. If you find something wrong with one of them, change to the other. If there is something wrong with both of them, go to the north gate alone. No matter what, we will leave when the gate opens at dawn. If we are lucky, we might be able to leave before the lockdown order is issued. Romain nodded straightforwardly. Then Brando took out the money he got from the noble's belongings and divided it into 2 portions. Both of you might need money for your actions. Here are 30 silver coins, half for each of you is more than enough. If possible, Roman, you can buy some food as well. Romain nodded seriously. What about you, Brando? Freya asked. You will be under a lot of pressure if you act alone. The White Mane army might intervene at any time. The Shire and I will go visit a few old friends to attract the attention of the guards in Fortress Reden. Brando replied calmly. Only the heavens knew how much determination Brando put into this sentence. His belief was that he could control the risks, just like when he passed through Xavier's mountain pass. That was because he was confident that he could guarantee the safety of Roman and himself. He never thought of himself as a savior or a hero. Even a meticulous plan has the possibility of failure, not to mention the probability of success when you stake everything on a single throw. This sentence was given to Brando by his old leader in the game, and it was also his motto. But this time, even he didn't know how big the risk was, but he had promised Roman and Butchie. As a man, sometimes he needed to be stubborn. Brando felt a kind of motivation that made his blood boil, supporting him to calm down and complete this task, to fulfill his promise. You're crazy, Brando. Freya heard the hidden meaning in his words and stared at him with wide eyes. You will be hanged, what do you want us to do? She suddenly felt that her words were ambiguous and explained with a red face. What I mean is, I don't want to be a bandit with you. Brando suddenly felt that this girl who didn't mean what she said was a little cute. It's okay, he said, I will invite you to join us, if there's a chance. He thought that there would be a chance, but how confident was he to convince the future goddess of war? There's no chance, Freya said bitterly. You and Roman should go together, I'm worried about her. No need, I believe in the little Roman. Romain raised her eyebrows, secretly happy. Freya was so angry that she gritted her teeth. She thought that this guy knew that she was worried about him, but he just had to force her to say it. What was even more infuriating was that even if she said it, he wouldn't listen. Forget it, I'm too lazy to care about you. She lowered her head and used her hand to push her ponytail behind her back. You be careful. Romaine gave him a small everything is okay hand signal and even waved it around. This was something she learned from Brando in the past 2 days. I'll wait for you at the north gate, Brando. The future merchant's carriage will only move once Brando is in it. Brando's heart skipped a beat when he heard this and smiled. About 10 minutes later, in the White Mane Army's barracks, you said you didn't hear anything. Luc Besson picked up a broken piece of wood and pointed at it. From the degree of shattering, it's at least at the level of a first-rank warrior. A black steel swordsman broke through our White Mane Army's prison and you tell me you didn't hear anything. Luc Besson, who was known as the Tiger, was 45 years old this year. His skin was dark and his forehead was sharp as if it was carved by a knife. His high cheekbones were half of the mountain people's bloodline. His cheeks were flat and skinny, and his deep eyes had a hint of wildness. Luc Besson had been promoted to the 104th Swordsman Regiment commander for 10 years. If he wanted to be promoted, he would have to rely on his reputation and experience in the army. However, Luc Besson was politically inclined towards the Everton faction, which was the so-called Revival Party. Furthermore, it was a fact that the White Mane Army had already completed the process of privatizing Count Pola, and he was no longer welcomed in the army. But this didn't stop him from showing off his authority in front of his subordinates. Tiger Luc Besson was not one of those nobles who got in through the back door. The general's words immediately made the few officers look at each other, especially the one who was on duty tonight. His face turned red. White Mane infantrymen wearing randy uniforms and pointed helmets walked in and out of the room. Compared to the guards, the biggest difference in their uniforms was the white wolf feather hanging down from their epaulets. This unique ornament was to commemorate the glory of the White Mane Army during the Battle of Jadens. It was also how the White Mane Army got its name. If the opponent is a Highland Knight, his acolytes would be able to do the same. Someone said. To the White Mane Army, the important thing isn't what your opponent did. The important thing is what you did. 10 minutes of reaction time, are you a militia? Luc Besson's reprimand made everyone speechless. At this moment, a military officer entered the room with his attendant. He held a sheepskin parchment in his hand and reported, "Commander, we have checked the information of the Bucci militia. There are indeed people named Freya and Roman in the records, but the young man named Brando doesn't seem to be from Bucci." Luc Besson was not surprised. He tapped the table with his finger and asked, "And then?" The attendant walked closer and whispered something in his ear. Luc Besson nodded. He asked again, "What is the attitude of the king's messenger?" The count did not say clearly, but it seems like he is hinting for us to execute him on the spot. The military officer replied. Luc Besson was slightly stunned. The king's messenger would go against a commoner. He rubbed his chin, trying to decipher the hidden meaning, but before he could do that, the whole room was already buzzing with discussion. Is that so? But why would that old man go with a commoner? I think he is interested in those 2 women, that old pervert. A gesture, I saw him admiring the elven sword with my own eyes. A country bumpkin who has never seen the world. Someone sneered. Luc Besson immediately slammed the table to stop the messy military officers. Just as he was about to reprimand them, another person pushed the door open. It was the messenger outside. "Commander, the local parliament is on fire." What a good diversion, Luc Besson could not help but curse. He immediately stood up and ordered, "I will give you 10 minutes to gather the 2nd and 3rd squadrons as soon as possible." Rows of military officers stood up. He then pointed to the other side, "The 2 of you, go and monitor the target. Makuelin, your mission is the hostel. You know what to do, don't alert the enemy." The 3 people who were called out lowered their heads and did not dare to hesitate. They immediately turned around and left. "Commander, what about Lord Cyber?" No need to remind him. Those fellows must be running off to court the king's emissaries, and they must be on one side or the other, don't they? The commander's words made the room filled with low laughter. P.S. Chongqing has become a rural area. There is no electricity every day, and the electricity only came back at 7 today. Seeing so many people saying that 2 chapters a day is too slow, I have the urge to vomit blood. Please vote. Chapter 57. The Tale of the Red Copper Dragon was such a bar. Its door was on the main street between Ponoa Market and the Travelers' Bridge. It was open all night and catered to mercenaries, adventurers, prostitutes, and merchants who sold goods of unknown origin. If one could tolerate the messy atmosphere and vulgar slang, it was a good place to have fun. There was cheap ale, scantily clad waitresses, and enough food to fill one's stomach. One could drink all night and not spend a few copper coins. One could even whistle as much as one wanted without worrying about being thrown into the dungeon for a night. However, Freya could not help but tremble a little when she approached the bar. The country girl held her sword tightly with both hands and her mind was filled with the tips that Brando gave her. Her face was flushed red as she lowered her head and carefully walked through the crowd. She was so frightened that even her ponytail was drooping. Freya could not help but let her imagination run wild. What if someone suddenly molested her? Should she cut off his hand with her sword? Or should she stab him with her sword? She stole a glance at the scantily clad waitresses. Her ears were burning. How could this be? It was shameless. Freya held her sword with both hands and walked to the counter. The chubby bar owner looked at her from head to toe. This is not a place for you, little girl. Freya's face turned red. Only then did she realize that Brando was lying to her. She could not help but grit her teeth and clench her sword. However, she was too embarrassed to lose her temper in front of a stranger. But when she thought of her previous behavior, Freya could not help but lower her head. Well, I'm here to ask about a person. Redo looked at the girl in front of him. Her head was almost touching the bar. He could not help but laugh. A bar is a place to sell information. But little girl, we don't serve you for free. I know. I'll pay. Please tell me. Well, who do you want to ask about? Hood, the textile merchant from Bonoan Market. That guy, are you his relative from the countryside? Freya quickly shook her head. No, someone just asked me to send a letter to him. Redo shook his head, but at this time, a group of guards outside hurriedly passed by. He was keenly aware that the little girl in front of him had tensed imperceptibly. He had been a barkeeper for 10 years, and his observation of body language was second to none in the neighborhood. He smelled something unusual at once. But what was even more dramatic was that the guard actually turned back after passing by. He shouted from outside the door, Redo, by the way, did you see anyone suspicious? Redo lowered his head and saw that the girl was pretending to be calm in front of him, but she was so nervous that her fingers had turned white. He sighed and asked, They're looking for you, right? Freya was shocked and subconsciously pressed down on the hilt of her sword. Don't be nervous. It's just a professional habit. Freya was stunned. At this moment, her thoughts flashed like lightning, and she unexpectedly said, I have money. Can you help me hide it? 100 Tor, do you have money? Redo smiled. He had a mix of good and bad people here, and it was common for him to hide a fugitive. Besides, he liked this little girl. 100 Tor was 1 silver coin, so Freya quickly nodded. When a few guards walked in from outside, Redo just happened to hide Freya in a wooden bucket behind the bar counter. None of the people in the bar had anything to do with the army, so naturally, no one stood out to identify them. Besides, each profession had its own rules. In a place like this where people from all walks of life mixed together, there were also rules that belonged to them. This was the so-called gray area. The guards in the city would come to the bar to inquire about information, and so would the illegal merchants and thieves. They all knew of each other's existence, but they abided by the rules and would not fall out with each other in person. This was the rule of the game. However, while Redo thought this way, the inexperienced Freya was different. As soon as she hid in the dark wooden bucket, she regretted it. She could not help but say to herself, Freya, oh Freya, have you never thought that others would betray you? You really can't do anything well. Are you still the captain of the 3rd squad of Butchie's militia? She heard the bar owner chatting with the guards outside, and the nervousness in her heart was indescribable. She was afraid that they would suddenly open the lid and drag her out. Although she said nothing, she knew what would happen to her if she was caught. But after a while, she heard someone knocking on the door outside. The voice said, "They've already left. Come out." Freya opened the wooden bucket a little and saw that there was no one outside. She could not help but breathe a sigh of relief, but she saw that everyone in the bar was looking at her with a smile. Some people even raised their glasses to toast her. Good, a little girl dares to go against those guys from the army. Come, cheers. Freya could not help but blush. She said to the bar owner, "Thank you." "There's no need to thank me. I'll charge you a total of 110 tor, the chubby owner said with a smile. He waved his hand and summoned a dark-skinned girl in a simple leather skirt. She had long braided hair and was wearing a simple leather skirt. "This is my daughter. Let her take you to Hood's house. By the way, little girl, let me give you a piece of advice. Don't run around alone at this time of night. Where are your companions?" Freya could not help but think of Brando. She wanted to be angry, but she could not bring herself to do so. She thought that Brendel had the intention of letting her come out to train herself, but when she thought about her previous performance, she felt nothing but shame. She could not help but tighten her grip on her sword. "I'm Sue." The girl looked at her and stretched out her hand. "I occasionally help my father look after this bar, but I'm free now, come with me." "Thank you, I'm Freya." Asterisk 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 asterisk, someone is trying to fish in troubled waters, my lord. The Shire stared at the tall building in the distance and replied. Brendel frowned. He did not expect there to be another faction in the city that did not belong to the two factions. The fire in the House of Nobles did not help him. Instead, it caused him a lot of trouble. But the timing was not bad. He thought for a moment. The other party should at least be an insider, or at least know that they have escaped. He thought back to the situation at that time. Perhaps it was one of the nobles. But who was it? What was the other party's goal? Brendel shook his head and threw these thoughts out of his mind. Even though he was a little unhappy about being used, he did not have the right to be unhappy about it as an insignificant person. "I hope it won't cause too much trouble," he said, "but we don't need to be affected. It's good that someone is helping us. We just have to do our own things." "But you haven't answered me yet. What are we going to do, my lord?" The Shire asked. "Someone lent me a sword. Of course I'm going to get it back." Brando knew that King Oberth VII was not a generous person, but he did not know how close the so-called king's vassal was. "Who?" "A count." The Shire snorted. "I've never seen anyone more lawless than you, my lord. Do you really think the noose is not hard enough for your neck? We are going to be hanged after escaping from the dungeon. If that's the case, why would we care if there is 1 or 2 nooses around our necks?" Brando could not help but laugh. To be honest, he was also very nervous. But he found that his squire was quite a humorous person. "That's true. But what do you plan to do, my lord?" "Attack from the front. Of course, the more noise the better." The Shire could not help but look at Brando. Although he was talking and laughing freely, his pale face and pale hands revealed his nervousness. Even so, the other party was still calm and composed as he laid out his plan. "What will happen if you die?" Brando thought for a moment and asked. "Cards that die on the battlefield will naturally enter the graveyard. Before my lord has a way to get me out, I will stay there." The Shire replied. "If that's the case, then I'll have to be careful," Brando said as he calculated the time in his mind. After calculating the time he had, he raised his right hand for the gargoyle to grab. The Shire raised his hand as well. The two of them looked at each other and nodded. The gargoyle quickly soared into the sky. Under the cover of the night, it flew towards a small forest on top of a hill in Fortress Reedon. The wind whistled in their ears. The Shire could not help but ask, "My lord, are you sure that a count will temporarily stay in a forest like this? And not the castle behind you?" He was referring to the place where the Pine River and Waysher River intersected, the castle in the middle of the river. "What did you say?" "The wind is too strong, I can't hear you." "I mean, my lord, are you flying in the wrong direction?" "Me? Of course not. Did I say that I'm going to look for trouble with the count? Then what are we going to do? Of course we're going to level up. If you want to do a good job, you must first sharpen your tools, understand? Level up. Is this some kind of ancient language? Nonsense. Let me tell you. In a game, there are 3 indicators that will always exist. They are skills, equipment, and stats. Brando shouted in the wind, "When you look at these 3 indicators, there will always be one that can help you. If you become a great wizard one day, you must thank me for telling you this secret." Game. Life is like a game, and a game is like life. Understand? I barely understand. My lord, you're really unfathomable. The Shire said, but he did not know that flying in the air at night was so cold that his hands and feet were almost frozen. Brando stared at the forest, thinking that he had at most 15 minutes. Inside Yusong Castle. The middle-aged man sat on the sofa and looked carefully for a long time, then put down the leaf-shaped sword in his hand. His expression did not change. He still had his cold expression, but the coldness in his eyes became more obvious. "What do you think?" the figure behind him asked. "This should be the sword. I don't know how that young man got it. But no matter what, he must disappear from this world. But the 2 women beside him are not bad, I like them. A little love won't hurt the big picture, but it's important not to delay the main business. If I don't give them a hint, those short-sighted fools will not think of using my name to do things. However, since they were the ones who killed him, it doesn't matter if we try to curry favor or flatter them, no one will suspect us. We just need to make everything look reasonable. As for personal reputation, when do we care about that?" The middle-aged man's thin lips curled into a cold smile. "You said it yourself, a little love won't hurt the big picture." The figure smiled and looked back at the sword. "Do you see any clues?" The middle-aged man shook his head. "It's not that easy." Chapter 58. Brando let go of the gargoyle's claws, and he and the Shire landed on the soft meadow. In the quiet woods on the top of the hill, they saw a crooked wooden house. It looked like a slum house, 2 stories high, and the dim light of a candle shone through the gaps between the wooden boards. "My lord, is this the level-up place you were talking about?" The Shire loosened his sore wrist and carefully looked at the house in front of him. He had a serious look of suspicion on his face. "I don't want to question you, my lord, but why does it look more like the place where the witches of Bunasan live?" "You're right, this is the residence of a witch." "Oh, the witches do have some ways to temporarily increase their power." "No, temporary power is too weak. Then my lord, your goal is the art of necromancy. The art of necromancy is indeed an emergency solution. But my lord, the evil spirits of the lower world are not easy to deal with. I do have a few ways to deceive them, but I haven't tried it myself. Brando walked towards the wooden house, and the young man followed closely behind him. The Shire, remember to tell me next time, but this time we are here to do business. Business? Brando had already walked to the door. He stopped, tensed his body, and slowly adjusted his breathing. Only he knew that the witch named Baba Shah who lived here was just a cover. When the nobles designed the family castle, they would often leave a secret passage for emergency use. The original owner of Yusung Castle, the Duke of Grenoires, was a conservative diehard who made many political enemies. The passage in the castle avoided the densely populated areas and went all the way to this hill. And Baba Shah, as the Duke of Grenoires' wizard advisor, guarded the exit of the secret passage for the Lord was a matter of course. This secret was discovered by the players in the Second War of the Black Rose. After the repeated tug-of-war with Madara failed to conquer Yusung Castle, they found the castle's blueprint. Brando was also very familiar with this level 32 which called Baba Shah. When Brando was leveling up in Fortress Reden, this was the only shop that sold mysterious items. At that time, he didn't have much experience in the game and liked to bet on his luck. In the end, he lost a lot of his hard-earned money to this old witch. However, this was not the main point. The main point was how to subdue this first ring Magus so that he could carry out his next plan. One of his hands was still on the hilt of his sword, and his fingers were cold because of his nervousness. He hesitated for a moment, then bent his finger and knocked 3 times on the 70-degree slanted wooden board with 2 slits, one long and one short. Soon, a shrill and old voice came from the second floor. Who is it? If you want a divination, come back in the morning. I'm not a diviner. I've brought something. You want to do business. Do you know the rules? The voice from upstairs paused and asked. I have what you need, witch. Really? You'd better take out what I want, or I'll dig out your heart and throw it to my dog. The shrill voice came from the second floor to the first floor, followed by the sound of someone going down the stairs. The door opened quickly, revealing an ugly old face. The witch looked at him with her turbid eyes under the hood for a moment, then said, If you have something to say, say it quickly. Brando didn't even think, and with a whoosh, he pulled out his sword and placed it on her neck. His move was out of everyone's expectations. Even Charles, who was at the side, was shocked. Who would do business like this? When he pulled out his sword, his whole body was like a tightened bowstring, so much so that after he succeeded, his whole body felt weak. He exhaled, and the hand holding the sword trembled. If Babasha's reaction was a fraction of a second faster, she would have more than 10 ways to turn him into ashes with a single spell. But it was really fortunate that this old witch was used to being pampered. With the strength of a first-ring wizard, she didn't put a low-ranked dark iron swordsman in her eyes. Perhaps Baba Shah still thought that even with the long sword on her body, she still had a chance, but for Brando, the outcome of the battle had been decided at this moment. The Shire was also shocked. He thought that escaping from prison or finding trouble with an earl was child's play compared to this moment. As soon as Baba Shah opened the door, he found out that she was a first-ring wizard. Martha above, a high-ranking wizard like her could beat 10 of him with one slap. But his lord didn't say anything and put his sword on her neck first. Young man, what do you want to do? Babasha's face was cold, and she asked sharply. Before your left little finger completes the movement of the 3rd section, my sword will pierce your heart. I heard from the witches that the heart is the source of a person's life and corresponds to the magic triangle. I've always wanted to see if this is true. Brando replied coldly, Of course, if I were you, I would stop this stupid behavior immediately. As soon as he said this, Baba Shah and the Shire's faces immediately changed dramatically. The Shire thought that this old witch was casting a spell, and he didn't see it at all. It must be a very advanced spell technique, but how did his lord recognize it? Babasha was even more shocked. A swordsman without a trace of magic waves recognized her spell technique at a glance, and accurately called out which section of the spell she was in. Was the world upside down? What do you want to do? Under the shock of her heart, her attitude softened and she asked. Duke Grimoires doesn't seem to have any friends in the capital. Presumably, the reason why he lent Pine Castle to the Earl is because the other party is His Majesty's close vassal. In that case, why should you die for a stranger? Although Brando said it with confidence, the hand holding the sword was trembling slightly. He always paid attention to Babasha's every move and look, for fear that the other party would play tricks. Originally, a level 3 or 40 wizard should have no secrets in his eyes, but his perception attribute was too low, and he could only guess. Brendel felt that it was a competition to see who was more daring. Babasha's face changed again. What did you say? My request is very simple. I want you to swear by your natal star that you will lend me the secret passage of Pine Castle once, only once, and I won't tell anyone. The old witch looked at Brando as if he was a monster. She was the only one who knew about the secret passage of Pine Castle other than the Duke of Grimoires. Even the Duke's personal attendants and family members didn't know. How did this young man know? Was he the illegitimate son of the Duke of Grimoires? I said no. I don't want to kill anyone. Only then did Babasha realize that she had no room to negotiate the price. She thought for a moment and had to admit defeat. Trembling, she reached out to the Witch King's constellation and was ready to swear, but Brando shook his head. Babasha, isn't your natal star Hydra? The witch shuddered. How did he know? She couldn't help but look at the other's dark eyes, as if all her secrets were exposed under the other's sharp eyes. Her natal star was the biggest secret of a witch, and she only gave it to the Duke of Grimoires to gain the other's trust. Babasha felt more and more that Brando was mysterious, so she didn't dare to play tricks anymore. She honestly pointed to her natal star and swore a poison oath. Brando breathed a sigh of relief, only to feel that his back was completely soaked in sweat. He put down his sword and said to the Shire, go to the back shelf and take the scrolls on the right of the first row. And the box in the middle of the second row, and the 3 reagent bottles on the left of the third row. Everything else, don't touch them. The Shire had already admired his lord. Before in the sky, he flattered Brando that he was enigmatic, but now he really felt that the lord was a bit enigmatic. At this moment, Babasha felt that she had fallen into a bottomless abyss. The young man didn't even look at the things on the shelf that were really useful, and which were full of vicious curses. After all, those things were secrets that only she knew. But the Shire cried out in surprise when he opened the box, these are elemental crystals. My lord, you can use them directly if you take some time to absorb them. But Brando shook his head, walked over and picked up the 3 gray reagent bottles at the bottom and asked, do you know what these are? Babasha also raised her head in confusion. Even the old witch herself did not know what was in the 3 reagent bottles. It was just that at her level, she could instinctively feel the magical ripples emanating from some items, so she kept them. After years, a thick layer of dust had accumulated on them. Originally, reagents couldn't be used casually. Not only could poison people to death, but the wrong way of using buff potions could also cause people to die. Magic was a powerful, mysterious, and dangerous thing. The Shire looked at it and shook his head. This is mana potion, how can you not even recognize this? Brando wiped the dust on the bottle with a little dissatisfaction, revealing the light blue liquid below. Impossible. Babasha and the Shire were shocked. Why are you so surprised? Isn't it just a mana potion? I want to ask you now, these 3 bottles of mana potion can increase your mana by 4 times. And regardless of the change in magic power, what level of wizard do you think you are equivalent to with 4 times your mana? Intermediate wizard, the Shire replied dryly. So, these are the 3 indicators I told you about. 3 bottles of mana potion. Before you finish using them, you will be an intermediate wizard. And in fact, you are still just an apprentice now, understand? The Shire nodded subconsciously, but that was mana potion, known as the gold of wizards. This thing was a product born out of advanced alchemy, and it was no easier to produce than holy water. He himself had only seen it in parchment scrolls, and it was just thrown to him so casually. Brando picked up the long parchment scroll on the top of the shelf again. This is the scroll that records the mystery of how the ascetics compress the air on both sides of their swords to make them sharp. Skills are part of attributes. These are the 3 indicators. Now do you understand what I mean when I say to improve yourself here? Learning a skill is not something that can be done overnight. What's the use of sharpening your spear before the battle, Lord? The Shire immediately said, but he saw Brando opening the scroll and sweeping it, then casually throwing it away. The scroll fell to the ground with a hollow sound, and the Shire stood there in a daze for about a few seconds. Then, he suddenly swung his sword towards the door of the wooden house, and with a cracked sound, the door frame, which was 3 to 5 feet away, broke outwards, and the door split into 2 pieces and floated outwards for more than 10 meters before falling to the ground. The Shire's jaw dropped, and his jaw almost fell to the ground. Brando also frowned. Just to learn this skill, he had used 153 points of skill experience. This was not a cross-profession skill, and the consumption of intermediate skill was too ridiculous. The forums said that this skill needed to be upgraded to at least level 25, so the amount of experience required was ridiculous. But in his opinion, it was still worth it. After all, he had learned more than 10 intermediate skills in his previous life, and half of them were skills that came with the profession. This scroll was probably the closest intermediate skill to him in the early stages of the game, but unfortunately, he missed it because of a little luck factor. So, whether he was going to carry out the next plan or not, at least the skill on this scroll must be obtained. Now, it was just on the way. He put down his sword, turned back to Baba Shah and said, "I'll borrow these things of yours, is it okay?" It was more like robbing than borrowing. But this old witch was not a good thing, so he had less psychological burden. But Brando just asked casually, and did not expect Baba Shah to kneel down with a plop, lowering her head deeply and touching the ground with her forehead. The dark prophecy says that only the dark dragon can see through all the secrets of the witches, and any means are just tricks in front of you. You see through people's hearts and understand all things. Ancestors of the Myrna, so you have returned. This time, it was Brando and the Shire's turn to be stunned. P.S. Christmas Eve, are you eating instant noodles or fried rice? Chapter 59. The Dragon of Darkness was the mortal enemy of the 4 saints in the Holy War, especially the Flame King Gretel, who had a grudge against the Dragon of Darkness. Although Brando was also puzzled as to why Baba Shah would say that, he could not agree this time. Otherwise, he would accidentally stand on the opposite side of the entire world of light. The Dragon of Darkness, Odin. I know that you witches see him as the guide of a dark destiny, but it has nothing to do with me. He looked at Baba Shah, but saw that the old witch was still kneeling on the ground in fear and trepidation, her whole body trembling. Brando was slightly startled and realized that he had gone too far. He had forgotten that the people of this world had great respect for the gods and the existence of great power. Even if they stood on the opposite side, they would not casually disrespect them verbally. As a player, he could not accept it all, and the remaining half was still due to Brando's influence. Therefore, when these names were mentioned, they naturally showed an expression of equality. This kind of equality was nothing to him, but in the eyes of the Shire and Baba Shah, it was a great disrespect. But the situation was a little different now. The old witch Babasha was in a deep panic, and the Shire had not come out of his previous worship. So this kind of natural behavior left more doubts in their hearts. Brando also realized this. He shook his head and said, "Forget it, think what you will. As long as you don't interfere with me, you are not allowed to go anywhere until the sun rises." Babasha pressed her forehead against the ground, and as expected, she did not dare to move. Brando gestured to the Shire, who was in a daze, telling him that there was a secret door under the table and for him to open it. The young man moved the table suspiciously, lifted the carpet and pressed it with his hand. Sure enough, there was only a thin layer under it. The Shire was a little used to his lord's foresight at this time, and could only conclude that there were still some things in this world that could not be found with human power. He found the handle on the side and pulled it open, revealing a dark and steep staircase below. "My lord, are we going in now?" he asked. "Of course, what else do you want?" Isn't there any other place in Fortress Reedon that I can level up? Do you think magic items are cabbages that you can pick up whenever you want?" "Cabbage? I mean, Tao Wu, you know that thing, right?" Brando slapped his forehead and realized that he had misspoken again. Wond was still a little different from the world he was familiar with. "Of course, but after hearing it from you, my lord, it's different." By Kai, what a poetic and picturesque word. Presumably, its root must have come from the ancient language. Look at the pronunciation, it's similar. Brando couldn't help but laugh. However, there were at least 2 other places in Fortress Reedon that had hidden side quests and benefits. The underground church and the famous Tower of Wind, but these 2 places had a level restriction similar to that of a door god. Moreover, it wasn't an NPC like Babasha, so he gave up after much consideration. His biggest dream now was to temper his strength while collecting all the treasures he knew of. However, he didn't have much time left. His current goal was to become a survivor, not a statistic. Once the First War of the Black Rose ended, before Erwin's civil war, Brando would have plenty of time to carry out his plan. With experience and the best equipment, becoming one of the strongest in Wond wasn't impossible. Brendel never believed that a strong person did not need to rely on equipment. As a player, the combination of attributes, equipment, and skills was essential to him. He picked up a box and swept all the elemental crystals into his pouch, 12 wind elemental crystals, 1 fire elemental crystal, and only 2 or 3 blue water elemental crystals. These elemental crystals were also known as elemental crystals. They were the condensation of free elements in the material world. They were supposed to be irregular prismatic crystals, but because they needed to be manually polished into pointed prismatic equivalents, each of them contained an energy of 1. After looting Babasha's collection, the 2 acted like the most competent robbers. They also took Babasha's candle and walked into the tunnel. A witch's candle was a magic item. It could teleport people to places where light could reach. This was a secret that only witches knew. Of course, Brando also knew about it. The secret tunnel in Castle Urson was about 1.5 kilometers long. Most of it was narrow and could only fit 1 person. In a slightly wider area, there were 3 poisonous spiders the size of humans. Wizards often did this kind of thing, raising servant beasts to act as their guards. Babasha obviously put them here to please the Duke of Grimoires. But these things could only scare ordinary people. For Brando, 3 of them were worth 9 EXP. The other end of the tunnel led to the cellar of Castle Urson behind a row of wine racks. But since it was an escape tunnel, it was naturally not sealed. Brando felt around the wall and found the mechanism. It was used to move the racks to one side. When the 2 came out of the tunnel, they both let out a long sigh. No matter how good the ventilation was, the smell of dust accumulated in the narrow tunnel was not something that ordinary people could tolerate. After walking for a long time, the Shire almost thought that his lungs were covered with a thick layer of dust. As soon as he came out of the tunnel, he immediately took out a silver pocket watch and glanced at it. 15 minutes has passed, my lord. It's okay. I originally reserved time to go to the Duke's treasury, but it seems that I have to give up. But most of the nobles' collections in the villas are just some art and jewelry. It's not much use. My lord is really decisive. Not everyone can stay calm in front of treasure. No, you misunderstood the Shire. I mean, just take 2 pieces on the way. I'll tell you which ones are authentic later. The Shire was surprised by his lord's greed. But he did not know that Brando's banditry did not originate from his personality. It was a subconscious behavior as a player. The two of them walked up the stairs and stopped talking at the same time. Brando extinguished the candle and handed it to the squire behind him. He put his hand on the doorknob of the cellar and activated his power. The doorknob cracked. He immediately pushed the door open. The 2 guards looked at him in shock, but they only saw that Brando's other hand had already pulled out a long sword. The sword drew a beautiful silver arc forward. The 2 guards were only halfway through the action of pulling out their swords when the sword in their hands was knocked out together with the scabbard. They were shocked and realized that they did not come with good intentions. They wanted to escape, but how could Brando let them go? Without hesitation, he chased after them and ended their lives. This was Brando's first time killing someone. He did not think about anything when he killed the 2 guards. His mind was not even blank. He felt that he was calmer than usual at that moment. Because if the other party did not die, he and the Shire would be in a situation of certain death. This was a battle of life and death. He did not even think about what would happen to the Roman or Freya. His survival instinct alone was enough to make him do it. But after killing, Brando felt a huge sense of suffocation. He tried to calm his breathing and stood there motionlessly with the long sword in his hand. He let the blood drip down the blade and fall on the stone floor. There was no reaction at all. At that moment, he thought of a lot of things. A lot of miscellaneous things drilled into his mind, but it made his mind appear to be in a state of vacuum. He almost lost his mind for a moment. At first, he wanted to find an excuse, but then he just wanted to comfort himself and make himself feel a little more at ease. My lord. The Shire saw his abnormality. Brando raised his hand to indicate that it was okay. He wanted to drag the 2 corpses into the cellar and hide them, but now he was not in the mood. He could not look at them. It was not that he was afraid of killing people, but he could not accept the impact for a while. But what made him feel a little relieved was that there was no experience in killing people. He did not know why he felt comforted by this. He should be in urgent need of experience, but Brando thought that if he could get experience by killing people, he might not be able to accept it. He thought for a while and felt that he was still a human. He could not accept the fact that he used the lives of his own kind for profit. Now we will split up. Brando took a deep breath and replied. Just tell me what to do. I will kill my way up to find trouble with the Earl. You will sound the alarm from the other side. Brando said as he counted from 1 to 100. When he counted to 30, he finally calmed down. Sound the alarm. Did you forget what I told you? We have to attack from the front. The bigger the commotion, the better. Then we will go back the way we came from and retreat through the secret passage. No, we have to kill our way out. The Shire was shocked. Why? The guest rooms are at the top of the castle. We only have time to escape from the top of the tower. But if the White Mane army still brings archers, you and I will have to pray for Lady Martha's protection. The Shire nodded and turned to leave. He did not ask where the alarm was. If he did not even know how to scratch his tongue, he did not need to be a squire. A knight and their squires should have basic combat skills. But Brando took the initiative to stop him. Wait, why are you in such a hurry? What's wrong, my lord? Do you have any other orders? Of course, go up the stairs from here and turn left. There is a corridor at the end of the stairs. If you see something that is easy to carry and sell, don't hesitate to take it. The Shire stared at him for a while and finally said, I take back what I said before, my lord. What sentence? The first sentence, not everyone can remain unmoved in front of treasures. It should be changed to, indeed, no one can remain unmoved in front of treasures. No, you don't understand. Look at the Shire. In the future, I will have to take care of the little Roman and her aunt. This is the responsibility of a man. It is not easy to support a family. I have my own difficulties. You should leave those words to the Duke of Grenoires. My lord, don't worry, I have studied appraisal in Buga. I will help you pick out the most valuable items. Brando was stunned for a moment and then laughed evilly. P.S. I had fried rice for dinner and instant noodles for supper. But why do I feel a little disgusted after eating instant noodles? You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.